All right. Afternoon, everyone. Let's get rolling here. We have about 25 folks, so I think that's enough to get moving. And just as a reminder, I am recording this, and it'll be posted on the Public Utility Law Judge's website after the meeting once it downloads. So appreciate everyone's comments on the regs, and I also appreciate everyone's flexibility in meeting a little bit later today and having to change the meeting dates going forward. So appreciate that. All right. So John has opted to go down to Annapolis to testify on some bills. So I don't know which one is worse if he's missing us at all. So he will not be here today, but I know he'll be watching the video, and I'll speak with him after today's meeting as well. So I think what we should probably do is skip the definitions. We'll come back to that later and just start off with some of the comments on section 20.50.15.03. Yes, Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, good morning, and good morning, everybody. I noticed that a couple of the folks who were presenters at the technical conference last year are on the call, which is very welcome. I'm wondering if we could explain what they are. I mean, they're tremendous resource people. So I think you've got Lisa Schwartz and Paul Martini.
Sure. Morning, Ms. Schwartz. Ms. Schwartz. Ms. Schwartz, how are you today, ma'am?
Fine, thank you.
Appreciate you being here. And the same to Mr. DeMartini as well.
Thank you.
And if I'm not mistaken, are you helping out staff with this, or? Okay. All right.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate you guys being here, and I'm sure you'll lend some excellent insight. So without any further ado, Mr. or Dr. Bartlett, I know you had some comments on the electric system planning process right out of the gate. Now, and hopefully everyone had a chance to look at the consolidated comments that John created and I sent around. All right, I'll take the silence as a yes. All right. Dr. Bartlett, you had...
Yeah, I think John has captured them all, and
okay.
So I think they're he basically does transcribe them into the comment section, as he did with some other folks' comments as well. So I don't know that if that's enough. That's fine. I feel the need to repeat it, but we could. They are points of discussion if that's possible.
Sure, absolutely. I know you had indicated, and I think you're correct with your statement that the order and the draft regulations are essentially a starting point. And
maybe.
Go ahead, sir.
Maybe, yeah. So I know it's a little hard for us to get started on this, but maybe that's part of the subject matter. I'm not sure. Having seen the draft regulations, I don't know what process we think we will use to use them as a starting point, but change them, because as I noted, basically what the commission has done is done in most cases taken consensus recommendations, which by definition are recommendations that the utilities agreed to, but it substantially does not reflect these regulations. Draft regulations don't reflect a lot of the input that stakeholders put in, including some of it was based on the technical conference itself. But I don't know how we're going to revise those, what you actually think we will do in this process, except I pulled out my notes from the October and November discussions we've had, and it seems like we're going to relitigate some of the points of discussion we did back then. But as I said, as a stakeholder, it's not it's not too satisfying to have gone through 2.5 years and had all these discussions and then have the regulations not really embody a lot of the points that stakeholders brought, since the process that we're talking about here is one where the utilities will talk about assumptions, and then they'll develop a plan, and then they'll get comments, and then they'll come back with a revised plan maybe, and then say why they didn't accept those comments. But there's no teeth in the process, and so we end up with the same thing that is whatever the utilities say. So I'm not sure, what are we going to do in this process?
Well, like you said, and I think I agree with you that this is just a draft. It's a starting point. So we can certainly flush things out, clarifying things as needed. But you also said, rejoining difficult discussions that were left unresolved. I think that becomes a stickier issue. We've got the commission order, and I know, I believe yourself and Sierra Club had raised some concerns as to whether it actually addressed issues or was clear enough, but we're kind of left with what we have.
So then what are we going to do? I guess that's my question. If we're not going to actually relitigate, what are we going to do?
I mean, we're going to try and draft the regulations to fit what the commission directed. And I'm not sure, obviously that's not the answer you're looking for. So,
well, again, we have some of the folks that were in the technical presentation back a year ago, and there was some key technical experiences and documented practices that were brought forward at that time, which was some of the things that we, the stakeholders, recommended be included, but they're not included. And so, is the possibility of putting those into these regulations there, or are we just kind of trimming the content that we have and what's in the order, which is at a pretty general level in many cases? What are we going to do? I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. We got a couple folks with their hands up. Ron, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe I could take a stab at asking a similar question phrased slightly different, where we have different views of what the order says.
Mm-hmm.
How would you like us to approach that?
Well, obviously, we can discuss it here, but also, there'll be opportunities for submitting something in writing if you want, if you have specific language that you'd like the work group to consider, and ultimately, everyone will have a crack at submitting comments to the commission with anything that you disagree on. Because I think the likelihood of us getting this right the first time when everybody's on the same page are slim. So far, at least that's my take. Doug.
I mean, I guess if they don't agree with the commission order, isn't the right thing to do to file a motion for rehearing? I'm not trying to be their lawyer, and I'm not giving any legal advice, but the commission's decided, and I think we need to honor that decision.
I would agree with that, and I think John kind of said that the first go around. I mean, we've got the commission order on the partial consensus and non-consensus items, as well as the consensus items that they accepted. So I think with the consensus items, I think we can just hopefully flush those out a bit more to the extent that they're consistent with the report we filed in November. And with the non-consensus items, we're going to have to, we just have to comply with the order.
Yeah, just to be clear on that wasn't my statement. That I think what I'm maybe referring back to is like John's black, white, gray.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about gray, so it's not something you can file reconsideration on. It's just a difference of interpretation of the order.
Understood. Well, and hopefully we can, but like I said, to the extent you have language that, is in that gray area that you'd like everyone to consider, great. But again, I know like some of the comments, raise some concerns about the order, but it is what it is. If someone wants to ask for reconsideration, they can certainly do that, but I don't see us doing that as a work group. All right. Al, does that help or hurt you?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it helps to know what we're going to do. It doesn't raise my hopes that we will actually get some additional content. I mean, yes, the order reflects largely consensus items, and on the non-consensus items tends to take the more conservative pathway, I guess would be the best way to describe it. So I guess that, except where Ron's saying we can look again at the order and see if there's flexibility, and maybe as we go through these items, we can do that and see if there is flexibility to have some discussion about them. And otherwise, I guess, yeah, then it comes to the hearing. I'm just trying to figure out how we can, what to expect in the discussions. So, for example, the first point that I made was that there are a number of additional goals that have been incorporated by the legislature since 2022, when the Climate Solutions Now Act was passed, and they are relevant to the distribution system. Is there some possibility of adding language that would allow us to and take those additional goals into consideration in distribution system planning? And in this year's legislative session, there are additional goals being proposed. And so are we locking ourselves at 2022, or is this a living document, because the distribution system planning process will go on for a long time? So it should reflect the state's goals at the time that the regulations are being developed, right? So,
Well,
but that language isn't in there.
And just speaking off the top of my head, I'm sure we can, and this is my first go around with regulations, but I'm sure that we could, or I believe that we could add in some language, these state goals and, as amended, or something along that line. Because I don't think the intent is to lock us into what was done or what was said a couple of years ago. Ethan.
To your point, Your Honor, that's why the Exxon Utilities recommended not specifically calling out any particular legislation. We are always bound by legislation, but rather that we will continue to meet state policy goals. And in the CSNA, there is an open-ended 11th piece for the commission to add in goals as they evolve for CSNA goals that, the 11 that were already there. There is a open-ended one for the commission to add in. So I think the regulatory and legal flexibility is already built into the system, and there's no need for us to have to rehash these regulations every time that there's a new law that Maryland.
Wouldn't that be fun though?
It would keep a lot of consultants employed, I'm sure, but as far as I'm concerned, I think it would be simpler to move on.
Yeah, no, and I agree, and hopefully we can craft whatever language is necessary to address those. All right. So I don't know if it'd be helpful if I shared my screen. Why don't I try and do that? All right, just bear with me for 1 second, please. I should be better at this, but I'm not. Oh, here we go. All right. So here is just going through John's compilation of comments, starting with utilities. Ethan, you guys don't like the Jade roadmap?
It's undefined, and it doesn't, considering its pieces are there, there's no real need to add it in. It's not really a regulatory concept.
Okay. All right. So Yeah, and I know we'll handle the definitions probably later once we get a more set definition or a more set of regs. Does anyone else feel like we should be including or excluding this? All right, I'm just gonna let me put all right, I'll make a note. It's not letting me edit it, but all right, I will go back and make a note that most folks seem, or all folks are agreeing with you. All right, so at least we're off onto a great start here.
By the way, we found that the only way to add notes in is do it at the heading. For some reason, it doesn't work inside of the table.
Okay. All right. All right. I will, rather than see me do this on the fly, I'm just going to make notes and go back and watch this again because I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Considerations feeding into types of projections. That just seems more of a typographical issue. Any concerns there? All right. I'm just going to move through these. All right. On to B. All right. Exelon questions whether or not this needs to be in the regulation.
Yeah, Judge, I think this was a misalignment from where John put our comment versus where it was. I think this comment was supposed to be about 1A in the next section.
Okay.
And just recognizing what 1B says in terms of covering those 3 planning horizons. Is there is both A and B necessary in terms of from a regulation perspective?
All right. All right. So just to go back up to A, that's requiring the electric system. Go ahead.
Not in A, within B still.
Okay, I'm sorry.
1A and 1B.
Okay, my apologies.
Right. So 1B outlines these kind of 3 time horizons that I think was consensus as a working group.
Mhm.
Then 1A, again, in terms of what should actually be in regulation, right? There's always a difference between what's in an order, what's consensus, but in terms of what actually makes it to regulation, I guess questioning, does that 1A need to be actually in regulation?
Right, just because it's because statute already allows you for the flexibility. Is that kind of where you're headed? And the commission's orders already said that. Is that kind of where what you're thinking?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. Anybody feel differently? Agree, disagree on the inclusion of 1A? All right. So seems like at least everyone thinks we can get rid of 1A. All right. I don't know if people are just, if it's noon, or if people are in a lunch coma, or we're just ready to agree on things. All right. So down to 2, just change parameters to guardrails. Any concerns with that one? And let me see. And on B, they just removed feeder projects, got rid of feeder. And before we get to the other comments, any issues or concerns with that? All right. Mr. Cathan, I know you had some questions, or go ahead, Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, maybe we're missing, there were some substantial comments that I think relate to B.
Okay.
The Sierra clubs, and unfortunately, somewhere I've got trying to find my comments got buried by the screen. Hold on.
Sure. Sierra clubs maintains that the planning should be done uniformly at the feeder level, and constrained systems should not be the only criteria for planning. I know that goes to. Go ahead, Jay. Dr. or Mr. Cathan, you want to go ahead, sir?
Yeah, I just wanted to, basically, just that's the main point, which is that, the constraint to be only on to constrained feeders. We're just, think that's too narrowing, but the more specific point that we're putting forth is that the order clearly states that details on how to identify situations would be specified in the regulations. And all the regs at this point do is just state that. They don't provide any criteria. And, I think those need to be determined and put into the regs to follow commission direction.
Okay, so you're looking for the criteria to determine the specific constraints, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure I got you. All right. Dr. Bartlett, did you want to weigh in, sir?
Yeah, we also have a comment on this one, where, and I don't, this may be an interpretation of the order kind of discussion. I think it can be, which is that making the requirement for constraints, whether they're feeder level or whatever, to be those that are identified in the context of proposed projects basically means that the broader constraint analysis, which is something that the certainly stakeholders have interest in as well, that those constraints should be identified whether or not they're related. This doesn't mean that every feeder has to be analyzed, as we're aware of staff's concerns about that, but an analysis of constraints on feeders that could be considered for intervention should be made available. That analysis should be made available. It shouldn't just be limited to the ones where the utilities have decided to do a project, but it should be those that are constraining the system in terms of its delivering grid services or increasing capacity or whatever. And so that should be a reward. Our suggestion, which is in the comment, which I can't see, it's quite small, is that it should be constraints that are limiting the functionality of the system, and that should be considered for intervention rather than just the ones where the utilities have decided to do a project.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
I think that's an interpretation. I think that would be an interpretive issue, not necessarily what does this order mean in terms of that specific piece.
Understood. Jacob.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight, I guess, a couple of things. One, I think the language as written, or at least as we look to edit, is consistent with what's in the order in terms of situations, very straight from the order, situations where there are system constraints that result in projects being proposed in an electric system plan. So that's straight from the order. And so I think our edit was trying to, I think it was originally written with feeder projects, and I don't think that fully reflected the order. I think the intent was providing feeder level data for constraints. And so we were trying to align with the order and be consistent with that.
Okay. All right. So is it fair to say that at least Exxon would disagree with Sierra Club's request for determining how to determine the constraints?
Yeah, I like I said, I think this piece, which is that level of granularity in terms of data being provided, the details in which that language within the order, the details of which shall be proposed by the working group, is to us about how that data is being provided, and so not necessarily the level of detail. I think the commission ruled on what level of detail should be provided as part of the levels of granularity. And the discussion, I think, is more reflective of how that should be provided.
I don't agree with that. It's not how it's being described or reported. It basically states that how they identify situations where the system constraints are being proposed. So it's essentially is the details on how they are being identified. What are the criteria? Not just reporting what are the constrained.
And I would only add that our input is complementary to what David's saying, because essentially what we're saying is that the analysis that identifies these constraints should be made completely available to the commission, the stakeholders, and others. We're using criteria that's appropriate, but if it's limited to the ones that where the utilities decide they want to do projects, and here's why we're doing this project, it doesn't give the full picture of the system analysis that people need to decide whether more intervention is required in other parts of the system that the utilities are dealing with. So I don't see that the order's language makes that interpretation inappropriate.
So if I understand what you just said, and please correct me if I'm wrong, so you're looking for, I guess, all the system constraints in addition to the ones that where the utilities are planning projects. Is that?
Yes, it would say, and here they're saying they're taking feeder level information. They're taking feeder projects out, but it would basically say, as we quoted it in the comment there, which I've now got my own version of, feeder level information will be provided as part of the planning situations. In situations where there are identified feeder level constraints on the distribution system's ability to meet anticipated load requirements, expand distributed energy resources, or achieve the state's clean energy and greenhouse gas reduction goals. So the constraints are not limited to the ones where the utilities have decided to intervene, but the constraints that are included in information are the constraints on the system's functionality.
Okay. All right. I think I understand where you're coming from, sir. Ethan.
First, I'd just like to point out that there is a misinterpretation in the CPSR and Sierra Club. They've taken a subclause of a larger sentence that I've put in the chat. The commission agrees that feeder level information should be provided as part of the planning process, but only in situations where there are system constraints that result in projects being proposed in an electric system plan, the details of which will be proposed by the work group and regulations. That sentence, if you drop everything from but to plan, it's still the same sentence. They're turning a subclause into the main point of the sentence, and this is all about granularity of reporting, not of planning. And we plan to constraints. That's what we do. I kind of surprised by, after 3 years of discussion of how we identify constraints in both hosting capacity and load, that this is now an issue that we're going to bring up at the drafting of regulations. And I think that that's just inappropriate at this point to be changing the whole goal of this. But especially based on a misinterpretation of a sentence.
Okay.
I would disagree that this is a new approach when we've been basically talking about systems analysis and constraint analysis and system needs. It would include exactly the kind of things that we're talking about.
Okay. All right, DeAndre.
This amounts to a shadow. This amounts to shadow distribution system planning. And once again, we've been over this many times. It will only create additional inability to act on actual DSPs and meet the needs of our systems if we have everyone saying, but what did you do for greenhouse gases here? Well, what we're doing here is making sure that people can get electricity.
That's not what we're saying, Ethan. We're basically saying, what is the analysis of constraints telling us that needs to be done? And then you can tell us which projects are being proposed for. And then it becomes an open topic for discussion. The underlying theme here is that the utilities don't seem to want to have discussion or transparency. You're basically, wanting it to have as much utility discretion as possible, which is fine from your perspective, but I don't think best from a stakeholder's perspective.
All right, DeAndre.
Yes. So, thank you. And I had a question. I mean, it's similar to some of the comments that staff presented earlier in this in the work group in regards to the regulations in 2050-09 and COMAR that govern hosting capacity. And in this regulation, it states that utilities shall establish hosting capacity policies subject to the following requirements. And it has utilities shall design a circuit, shall designate a circuit a closed circuit if there is no remaining hosting capacity. A utility shall designate a circuit a restricted circuit if only reserve hosting capacity is available. And it says a utility shall determine the amount of reserve hosting capacity on a restricted circuit based on a circuit-specific assessment of distributed energy resource forecasts or other factors, including customer density, type of area served, and customer demographics of the circuit. So my question is, and I guess this could be for the utilities, whomever, are utilities able to provide that information by doing a substation level evaluation?
No.
Because I guess the goal is to be consistent with existing regulations and with what we propose to be consistent with existing regulations and what has been directed by the statutes. So does that answer the question, or does that have any relevance to the level of granularity that we're questioning here? That's my question.
All right. Jacob or Ethan, can you guys weigh in on that?
I was trying to, can you drop in the chat, DeAndre, what existing regulation you're referring to? I got lost as you were talking through, and that's on my end, so I just want to look it up real quick.
Yeah, we may need to take that back. Just
Okay. No problem.
we were unprepared for this to review a different regulation that's already up.
Judge, I'd like to respond to Ethan's comments. Back to the question about my Sierra Club's comments about
Sure.
details. And I went back and reread that sentence. And to me, in the details that will be shall be proposed by the work group in regulations. And what I don't see is any details. What I see is a statement that feeder level information shall be provided as part of the planning process in situations. That's just a restatement of what's in the order. It's not providing any more information. That's all we're seeking here is, that, there is, more specificity in the circumstance. I'm not necessarily, of course, we're not necessarily in agreement with the commission. We're not arguing about the call. We're just asking for more information.
Sure. Okay. And I get that. And I mean, to the extent, do you have specifics? I mean, to the extent you have specifics, that would be preferable.
Okay. Well, I don't have the specifics with me right now, but I will work on that.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Sam, let's see. We had Samrat and then Jacob. Samrat, you there? If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Yes, I forgot to unmute myself. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I'll let Jacob and everyone go and then come back again because my comment might not be. I don't want to ruin the flow of the discussion.
No problem. Jacob and then Ron.
Yeah, just following up on David's comments there in terms of like the details. Like I said before, I think that statement's really about the details of how the information is being shared. And I think that is where that's appropriately discussed and laid out then is in the process portion of the regulation in terms of like the 6 different steps of, stakeholder engagement, sharing information, tech conference. And so I think laying out details of how this information would be shared is more appropriate to be reflected in any regulation that's developed there than it is in this piece, right? This piece is here just kind of defining what level of granularity should be provided, and that should be then consistent with the order that the commission laid out.
Okay, but so when David sees the details of which shall be proposed, you're thinking that's more just the procedure, the kind of the 6-step process we talked about or we agreed upon in the last phase, rather than specific details of those feeders. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, saying, right, so the sentence in the order, right, especially if you kind of take out the pieces between the commas, right, the feeder level information should be provided as part of the process, the details of which should be proposed by the working group in regulation. So saying, you know, we have built out already later in regulation a process where we're engaging stakeholders, sharing information, filing things with the commission, having a technical conference, right? So that's the kind of already the structure of how things would be provided. And I think that is where in the regulation, it would be appropriate to potentially flush out the details of what and how that should be provided versus in this specific piece of regulation.
So you're not necessarily saying it shouldn't be provided, but just not in this particular portion of the reg.
Correct. This portion, I would say, should just reflect the levels of granularity as defined by the commission.
Understood. Okay. All right. So well, hopefully that will. I'm not, Mr. Cathan. Does that put you at ease at all?
I hear it. I'm about to take that under advisement.
That's fine. That's fine. It sounds like they're okay with putting something in, just not in this particular spot. Ron, and then Dr. Bartlett.
Thanks. I just wanted to your question on specificity to David. Our interpretation of what was requested for this work group was our initial impressions, and so we have not offered red lines, obviously, yet. So I just want to note that those are forthcoming.
All right. Looking forward to that. All right. Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I just want to say that if we don't want specificity, that as it's worded, it does have specificity. It basically says that the constraints that would be determined would be those that are related to utility proposed projects. That is specificity. So if we don't agree with that specificity, we're proposing alternate specificity. But that's not the same as saying it's not specific. It is, and we don't agree.
Right. Well, do you agree with the premise that maybe it shouldn't necessarily be here, but if we put it in someplace else in the regs, that'd be sufficient? I guess we can wait and see.
Yeah, I think it's a wait and see, because I mean, we do later on, we get into constraint analysis and grid needs analysis. If it's in there and explicit, then maybe that's the right place, but I don't think that it is, honestly, at this level.
All right, fair enough. Thank you, sir. All right, Samarit.
All right, so want to apologize for not properly introducing Lisa and Paul DiMartini. So staff has obtained technical assistance from DOE. So we're very grateful for the assistance of Lisa Schwartz and then Paul DiMartini on different staff positions. So we're gonna leverage their expertise. I want to say that first. So the other comment I have is, I think following on the granularity discussion, I think it should be tied to the grid needs discussion, which would come later on. I understand, we're trying to frame like what kind of information is required to be provided, but the whole discussion of granularity as it's written here is very, very much tied to the grid assessments discussion later. We're going to provide additional comments on it. Just want to say that up front.
All right, very good. All right, so why don't we put a pin in this, and obviously we'll talk about it more when we get to the appropriate section. All right, scenarios and projections. You go ahead, Ethan. Did you want to say something, sir?
Oh, pardon me, my mic was on.
No, it's not a problem. Not a problem. I enjoy the company. All right, so looks like OPC and both OPC and Exelon recommended some changes. Actually, OPC and Exelon agreed on getting rid of the number 2 here under 3A2. Anyone want to fight for the continued inclusion of that? All right, Jacob, Ethan, did you guys coordinate this with OPC, or is it just a coincidence? Andy. Andy, if you're talking, we can't hear you, sir.
Oh, how's that?
That gotcha.
Great. This is Andy Iden with CEG on behalf of the OPC. I think the edit there just meant to reflect that it was repetitive. So the subclause under A2 was already reflected in subclause B. I'll add, I don't know that we included it in this set of comments or reactions, but reading back through the sort of stakeholder final working group report and the commission's order, they mentioned minimum of 2 scenarios, and I think there was pretty broad agreement of benefit of having flexibility to do 3 scenarios, and that there was just some disagreement on how to arrive at that. And so I think that might be a topic we could maybe discuss and say, is there something useful and what are those parameters?
Sure.
But I'll leave it at that.
Sure, absolutely. I was just excited that you guys agreed on something. All right, so moving on to B, Exelon suggested it should be a goal scenario to meet state policy goals as determined by the commission. And then OPC had added, for example, CSNA, among others. Any comments? Or yes, go ahead, Jacob.
I guess my just thought is it feels unnecessary, kind of to the earlier point of these state goals are always going to be, those policy goals are always going to be evolving. And so if we're thinking about regulation, keeping it broad enough, saying we're meeting state policy goals, again, just wouldn't want to limit ourselves within the regulation, would want to have it reflect kind of that broad policy space.
Sure.
I would just note that providing an example doesn't constrain the analysis.
You could always put in something, including but not limited to, but or such as. But Jacob, is that a huge deal for you guys to include that? I mean, and I don't even know if that's something that, in terms of just drafting the regulations, is something that's proper to do. So with that being said, Jacob, is that something that's, is this a hill you guys want to die on?
No, certainly, not a, significant issue, just
okay.
Feel like it's unnecessary.
Understood. All right. Yeah, Samarit.
Yes, so I don't think we've provided this comment in our initial comments, but we will be providing further comments in the future. But maybe we need to define what a baseline scenario means and what a goal scenario is. I think it's very broad the way it's written here. What does that entail? I think it's not very clear. I would just say that.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know if that's something that we specifically included in terms of the baseline scenario. If we included that a specific definition in either of the reports, I'd have to go back and look at that. But yeah, that probably wouldn't hurt to have a definition of that. Again, that's just me off the top of my head. All right, then jump into C. It said the commission may request or a utility may propose additional scenarios to be analyzed by a utility at its discretion. And Al and OPC both had some comments. With OPC just suggested maybe changing at its discretion to by petition. My guess would be to allow stakeholders to propose additional scenarios. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. And if that language was already clear, I just flagged it as
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. No. I just make sure I understood where you're coming from. But
It's still the commission's discretion if people want to petition, but you know.
sure. I hear you. And Al, before I get to you, Exelon, you guys have any thoughts on OPC's suggested change?
Yeah, because I think where they're coming from is similar to where we were coming from. Is, you know, there's language in the order that, you know, creates that space for the commission to create an additional scenario, and so we are just trying to reflect that language. And I don't know if by petition fully gets to it either, and so there may need to be some reworking. I'll throw like the sentence in the chat just for folks' awareness from the order, but you know, there's certainly space within the order for proposals or petitions to be brought to the commission with respect to an additional scenario. But obviously, you know, I think at its discretion is still there for the commission to be able to say whether they want to accept those petitions or not. And so just trying to create the space for that.
Sure. It sounds like OPC's just wants to make it clear that those additional scenarios could be proposed by other parties. That's what it sounds like. So maybe it's just a question of reworking that to make that clear.
Right. Yeah, and it could be a mix of both of our proposals to kind of get to that language.
All right. So let's so Jacob's proposed oh wait. All right, so it's obviously the second one says additional scenarios may be proposed for specific needs or goals in annual DSP technical conferences or in other petitions.
Yeah, so that's the just straight from the order language.
Okay. All right, and let's see. That looks like it's on page 8, I believe. All right, so I mean, I'm happy to try and come up with some to reword that to make it a little more clear, unless anybody else wants to take a stab at it. But I think so. It sounds like we're in agreement, or I know, Al, we're coming back to you. At least we're in agreement on that. It's just maybe a wording issue. All right, Al, you had some comments here, sir, on the scenarios.
Yeah, but I didn't realize that how constrained we were going to be in terms of, you know, the black and white of the order. The reality is that, I mean, and there's a lot of legislation that's right now trying to deal with the fact that we already understand that demand is going to exceed projections substantially, and that it's putting a lot of pressure on the system. And so maybe at its discretion, the commission will decide to require a scenario developed to examine that reality, but it is in fact the reality that we're living with. And so I was just putting it here as something that we might be able to consider at the regulation development phase, but apparently if we're constrained by the black and white of the order, we can't do that, but it obviously needs consideration.
Right, yeah, and to the extent that the legislation, I know there's several bills down in Annapolis that could impact our work group. I mean, we certainly keep an eye on them. You know, there's certainly a chance if some of those pass, it could just kind of blow up everything we've done, or maybe make it more clear. I'm not sure. So we'll just have to continue to monitor that. But I would agree with you that you know, the commission could request something, or a request could be made by one of the stakeholders. So I think the language in C would at least give the commission the flexibility to require another scenario, and looks like anyone would be free to make a proposal.
Well, it does. It actually only says utility.
Right. Yeah, I think we're in agreement right now that we have to change that to make it a little clear, to to make it a little clearer that anyone, utility or stakeholder, could request or propose a scenario, and it would be up to the commission to determine whether or not the scenario is appropriate.
Okay, so we've agreed on that clarification. That would help.
I think we've agreed that the language needs to be clarified. Now, what exactly it ultimately ends up being, I don't know. But I said I would be happy to try and take a stab at that, and we can go from there. All right. Anyone else on 3? All right. All right. So data sources, scope, and access. Looks like Exelon thinks this is. I don't want to say it's not needed, but it's already addressed. Al, you had some comments on this as well, and as did OPC. How data will be provided. It seems like this is more of a process in terms of how it's going to be provided. Yeah. Time suggestions. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify on OPC,
Sure.
on the comment that we included here, I think it's we didn't go into excruciating detail just because we wanted to have the discussion,
Sure.
just flagging that there was a number of non-consensus items or partial consensus that the commission didn't directly weigh in on. And this is a foundational aspect. So I think it goes back to actually what the conversation was about the granularity aspect. Like maybe it's not pertinent there, but there's certainly elements of grid planning that don't directly relate to like the load and DER forecast that what I saw when I read through the utility proposal sort of speaks to a lot of that, like gathering information from stakeholders about potential DER locations or, you know, local planning ordinances that have to do with zoning that might impact load forecasts. So that's all good. And I think though when the load forecasting meets up with the system constraints planning and eventual needs identification and solution development, I think a certain amount of provision of data outside of just where where the utilities have identified constraints would be reasonable. Just what that is and how I know there was a lot of discussion about you can't ask for everything because that is an enormous amount of data, and I agree. And there was some straw proposals in what appears to be some previous working group sessions that, you know, the utilities kind of have the viewpoint of if it's reasonable and for a specific purpose. So I think I would recommend we spend some time thinking about that because I do think there's some reasonable asks that could be made available.
Okay. All right. All right. Al, did you want to weigh in on yours or?
Can I mute myself? Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah, I think basically it's what was just said that there was not any specificity really provided in just the topic areas that were identified in the straw man are topic areas, but it doesn't specify what information would be provided, and I think there is room for discussion of that. So I think that's similar to the comment before.
Okay, great. All right, go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. One, in terms of you know, Al, your comments around you know, how it's being presented. I guess just broad question for me is that something that really should be in regulation, right? Or are we saying, you know, something has to be delivered in a Excel or something format, right? If things change over time, is that necessary to be defined within regulation, right? Versus just defining what should be shared, you know, like is described later. And I guess broadly too, you know, we did generally come to alignment and consensus on, you know, what information should be shared. And so, you know, I guess that was accepted by the commission. So trying to understand, you know, now that we're asking for additional data, I think it would be helpful to understand what additional data people are asking for and why. And I think that's a question, you know, we've asked before and not always gotten answers to be able to understand kind of, you know, the reasonableness of some of those asks. So I guess that's some of our challenges is we came to agreement and kind of consensus in terms of what those topics are and what information the utilities should provide. And so the commission ruled on that. And so we should be consistent with what the commission ruled on versus, introducing new asks here after the order.
Well, Jacob, at least in some degree, it sounds like a question of, I guess, maybe we don't get down in detail as to like the actual format of the information that's going to be provided, like you indicated, like email. But it sounds like more of, if I understood Al's concern, is when in the process it's going to be provided.
So if that's the question, when in the process, I felt like we had already identified that in the straw process, right? For each of those steps, I know it's not fully reflected in the draft regulation, but I mean, if you look at the latest DSP straw proposal, within each of those steps, it outlines what data would be provided, what information would be provided during each of those steps. So I thought we had gotten to the points of when in the process it would be provided, but maybe I'm just misunderstanding kind of the ask.
All right. And maybe I'm not stating it correctly. Al, am I getting, or Jacob and I understanding what you're asking for?
I was asking, it seemed to me that this part that's in yellow in the order basically was saying that we need to have more specifics about the level. It almost connects back to the granularity issue, but the level of information that's being provided about the different steps that the straw man does identify. That, yes, we will talk about. I'll have to go back to the straw man, but the constraints and the locational value, so on and so forth. What kind of information is going to be provided? I thought that's what Andy was saying as well. That there's room for discussion here about, under those topic headings, what information would be provided.
Okay. All right. So you're looking at more this. You want to detail the specifics that are going to be provided.
Yes.
Okay. All right. It sounds like that's the same kind of thing that OPC is looking for. Now I haven't gone back and looked at the order or at the report that we filed, but it's Al, Andy, do you guys have any specifics at this time? If not, we can certainly follow back up with this.
Yeah, I think we should revisit that. I think that's why we put the comment in that this was an area for additional discussion, and if so, then we can work on proposing. I guess we could do that offline and come back together or something, but just again, the level of specificity in the straw man is very general. It's topic headings basically. So
okay.
Yeah, I'll add a few thoughts on my end. So we've talked a bit about the constraints. So obviously, if there's a feeder or substation constraint, there's a certain amount of granular information that'll be provided. But I think, it's trying to weave together these various topics of DER and load forecast and then solution and all that. I think it would be helpful for stakeholders to be able to, not just for like I think Al and others have said, after there's a constraint identified as kind of after scenarios have been run or a load has been analyzed. And I think getting a sense for geographic distinction of peak load on circuits and substation transformers, like what's the rated MVA of certain assets, and then what is the historic peak load, or what's the amount of installed distributed generation on a circuit, those type of typical factors that eventually will come to be relevant for things like hosting capacity constraints or thermal violations of load growth and things like that. And I think if you click down from there, I agree. I mean, you don't want exact copies of utility distribution, power flow models circulating that'll be out of sync, and then people will be talking past each other and having that shadow DSP process that Paul DiMartini talked about. And I think utilities have pointed to the risks there. And I tend to agree with that, except I also would offer there is relevant information for studying certain patterns, like certain like circuit types and customer configurations, and what type of DER solutions are going to be relevant to introduce and have discussion about. So I think there's a certain amount of information there that, you know, related to like load profiles on a certain prototypical circuit, or number of like, you know, maybe that's an anonymized load profile, or just for the 24 hours of the constrained day or the peak day, and the customer makeup of such and things like that. So I think it is a little more specificity in things that drive towards, you know, not just for any old reason, but driving towards these are the items that we think stakeholders are going to be most concerned about in the solution identification phase.
All right. All right. Thanks, Andy. Jacob, any reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, obviously, I don't think we're going to solve it on today's call. So, you know, as I said,
come on, we can certainly bust through this. Come on.
we work through lunch. We can work through dinner too, right? No. Again, like I said before, would certainly be interested in understanding and appreciate Andy kind of highlighting some examples. But as you're saying some of those things, what are some of those concrete, you know, pieces of data? It would be helpful for us to understand. You know, and I appreciate the acknowledgement of shadow planning. Obviously, you know, I think there's still real concerns in terms of kind of how you're describing that, and some of that still kind of reflects, you know, doing some level of shadow planning, which is, you know, burdensome to ultimately all parties involved. And so, but would want to, you know, have kind of more concrete information to be able to understand what the ask actually is here.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. So
Just to follow up, but Jacob, you need to hear the asset ratings, historic peak load, forecasted peak load, DERs installed, customer makeup on feeder. I guess those are the things that we'll be putting into red lines, but do you have any reaction to that?
I mean, if you can send them over, it'd be great.
Ron, are you talking for just the constrained feeders or for all feeders?
We can put some thought towards, you
I
know,
was just,
ones would be,
okay.
I think certain ones that are relatively easy and, you know, should be available in a typical database
Okay.
format, shouldn't be a burden. But as you get more into obviously more detail, that we could have an internal discussion and try to arrive at some recommendations for how to sparse that.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. All right. All right. So we will put a pin on this and look for some more specific details from OPC and Dr. Bartlett as in terms of what exactly they're looking for. All right. 5 and 6, there were no comments. Anyone have any issues or concerns with these based on what we've said so far? And that is fine. Don't feel pressured.
Yeah,
Right.
so not to spoil your. I know Chuck, you're excited on that. I'd say these ones we kind of skipped over in our initial review, just
Okay.
Based on the ones we did comment on. So just like Ron said, we may come back. I'm not certain on that. Probably much
All
on
right.
these. So.
All right. I appreciate you letting me know not to put 5, 6, and 7 in stone. All right. All right. Goals and objectives. Looks like Exxon just said this section is more general regarding the state goals. All right. So, Jacob, with this, are you just looking literally to get rid of all you know, A through L? Just something more general, just
Yeah, I mean, so I think that gets to just some of the discussion we've had already around goals of, given that these goals are going to, you know, consistently be changing, both,
right.
you know, and I always want to try and separate. There's the distribution planning goals, right, or electric system planning goals that the state's created, and there's also all the climate goals that the state has, right? And those are two separate things. But just given that either set of those goals are continually to be evolving, you know, is it necessary to have that in regulation? If it's in regulation, does that mean we're going to have to be continually updating that to reflect it anytime there's changes? And so is there a way just to kind of broaden this of around state policy goals that would kind of be able to just reflect that, you know, there may be statutes that are aligning to these goals here, or just generalize it some?
Okay, understood. Anybody disagree with that approach?
The only thing I'll note is, part of the tension here is ensuring that we share an understanding of the goals that we're talking about. And so that's I think the challenge that we have, that we can put some thought through.
Sure. Yeah, because it looks like this is just more or less quoting the statute.
Yeah, I get, but as things evolve as well, right? To Jacob's point, that things can diverge as time goes over, and I'm not sure. I'm not saying that I have an option for addressing that, but
Sure.
just
Yeah. No,
identifying the issue.
no, I hear you. I hear you. Okay. So, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Bartlett.
I was just going to say that, as Ron said, I feel uncomfortable leaving it totally general, but if it can be worded that we came into this discussion 2.5, 3 years ago, with the specifics that are listed here as a framework that we've been working with as repeatedly, including in orders, as the things that distribution system planning is supposed to do. I think that, as I said originally back at the beginning of this, where there's also a reference to goals and policies, that does need to evolve as new goals have been established and others will be. So I think it's appropriate to have wording there, but I think we need to think about how to put a little bit of specificity in, a little bit of teeth in here that actually make the goals a reference point for the planning, so that it's quite clear that that's what the planning, that is a key part of the framework for the planning, and not to say, it should be consistent with goals or something like that, but we actually have spent all of our 3 years using this framework, and there's more, but I don't want to lose that sense that the DSP needs to be responsive. And I guess the utilities will argue that, yeah, we always have to obey the law, but I think that we need to be a little bit more specific, as we have been up until now.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think, I understand everybody's comments, and, we just need to get to the point where we don't have to, if the legislature changes, adds something or takes something away, where we need to go back in and have a rulemaking every time. So, all right. So it seems like we're generally in agreement on this, but we'll have to come up with some language on this. And Damon, you said something all right. Regulations should specify what data will be disclosed and the timing for such production. I guess you're going back to the previous discussion.
Yeah, sorry, Judge. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, I apologize. I was halfway writing before you jumped to the next.
My apologies.
I didn't need to steal time.
No, you're fine.
I just wanted to get the thoughts out, just with respect to data handling.
Sure.
Certainly, as a utility, we always have concerns about how that data will be managed, stored, used, and so just want to make sure we're thinking about that as well.
Sure. Okay. So, and it sounds like you're kind of in agreement with Dr. Bartlett and OPC in terms of, they're looking for what's going to be provided and when it's going to be provided. So, and hopefully, when they submit their comments in terms of, their proposals, they'll include the why, and who will receive such data. All right. That's fair. The confidentiality, obviously that's what you're referring to, but, Damon, is it fair to say, or can you give me a wag as to, based on, our previous phases, the information that, we've discussed in the straw man, can you give me a percentage of what is and isn't confidential?
I wish I could. I don't know. I don't know if others from SMECO or the other utilities have
Sure.
some sense, but I would say that any sort of critical disclosure that could compromise the system operation is certainly a point of concern. And
Sure, absolutely.
when we're talking about planning, it obviously gives insights into how, you know, an unscrupulous person could compromise an aspect of the system. So we just have to be careful. We have an obligation to ensure the integrity of that information.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Okay. All right. All right. Moving on. Let's see. All right. So I'm sorry. Where were we? We were at goals and objectives. All right. All right. So we're going to try and make that a little bit more general. State policies and priorities. My guess is no one weighed in on that. Again, I know it's not written in stone yet. But I think maybe the same thing would apply. I don't know if we need to make this more general or if we necessarily even need, well, I don't know if we need B, but that's just me. Anybody have any thoughts? All right. I'm sure y'all will bring it back up. All right. Holistic approach to grid planning. OPC wants to define term control, and the Exelon utilities would like to get rid of this as it's too general. All right. Anyone disagree with striking the entire provision? All right. I will just put in no comment. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Bartlett. Go ahead, sir. Sir, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm expanding and contracting the screen so I can read it. But then, yeah. So we did work on this quite a bit, and the holistic word still kind of throws us off. But the utility shall part forward from that, I think are things that we establish it. I mean, if we take all these things out, there are no criteria, you know, for evaluating these plans. And this was one of the places where we actually established some criteria. So I think that I would maybe take out the first sentence with a holistic thing, which nobody really ever defined, and just start with utility shall.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. And David agrees with you. All right. Let's see. And OPC obviously agreed. Jacob.
Yeah, I'll say, you know, I think it goes back to a couple of things. One, you know, like I mentioned before, I think there's always differences between, you know, what's in the final report, what the commission orders on, and then what actually makes it to regulation, right? Everything that's in a final report doesn't make it into regulation. And I appreciate that this is something that we all agreed on, but as we actually think about the distribution system planning process or the electric system planning process, and what is that process, and how are we executing it? How are we engaging stakeholders? Really felt like this is a very kind of just broad, generic definition right here that doesn't really attribute towards actually that process. This feels closer to kind of the goal and objectives that we kind of outlined also similarly within the working group. And so feeling like in terms of actually implementing distribution system planning within regulation, that, you know, this is an unnecessary add to that regulation. Instead, the regulation should be focused on what's actually required of the utilities to implement.
All right. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I just go back to the point that, you know, if we keep taking these things out, then what the utilities are required to do is basically what the utilities want to do. And I'm not against the utilities, but I think that we're in the process of establishing regulations that are like the rules of the game in football. You have to play within certain parameters, and there are certain rules that govern and certain requirements. These seem to be reasonable requirements for the planning process, and if they're not incorporated here or somewhere else, then these criteria for evaluating plans disappear, and then stakeholders don't, or even the utilities themselves don't have any basis for saying, well, we're doing this because you told us that we should incorporate new cost-effective technologies into the planning, and that's why we're doing this. Okay, that's required here. You take that out, and where's the requirement?
Okay. So it's kind of like they're making up, they can make up their own rules, so to speak. So it's kind of like playing Monopoly. Some people play.
So to speak. Yeah.
What's that, sir?
So to speak, yeah.
Yeah, 3 doubles in a row, you're in jail. That's not how I play. All right, Damon and then Jacob.
Thanks. I mean, I guess my only comment on here is we need to be careful how directive some of these provisions are with respect to what I would potentially perceive as directing investment by utilities. So I'll take, for example, C, increase the ability to monitor, control, and enable DERs. Now, that could necessitate $1 billion investment. I don't know. As a nonprofit cooperative, we may not think that's in the best interest, and our customer members may not think it's in their best interest to pay for something like that. But by baking into regulation, the commission would effectively be directing the utilities to make those investments, regardless of cost. That concerns me.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you, Damon.
And I would just say, cost effective, when we start using that phrase, I don't know what we're talking about. Are we talking about the uniform cost benefit test? That is another work group proceeding. We just got to be careful using the phrase cost effective too.
Sure. And I think we'll probably get to the cost benefit a little bit later, because I saw a few folks reference that in their comments. Jacob and then Ronald.
Yeah, I mean, I think Damon brings up a lot of great points there, and just add to it, even 3D, for example, right? Providing safe, reliable, affordable service to ratepayers, right? That's already, required of us as a utility. Does that really need to be in regulation here, right? Is that then in conflict with some other existing regulation? That's where just getting to that point of like, it's very general. It's just kind of a definition that was aligned to within the working group. And does it really need to be reflected in those rules, right? Those rules and regulations that we're actually creating, these general rules kind of can create really challenging situations.
Understood. Okay. Ron, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. I guess I see this as being a demonstration of prudent investments. I think 3D is kind of reflecting what Damon was saying about this regulation doesn't live in a void where you are not providing an affordable service. And these issues are becoming more important, especially when we start thinking about prudence investments and how utilities are investing in communications networks, DERMS, those types of things. And so having this information provided within the distribution system plan is becoming increasingly important.
Okay. So fair to say you don't believe it's as directive as Damon would indicate?
No.
Okay.
Would not.
Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just respond 2 ways. One, I think you could write something that says that the plan shall reflect upon efforts to increase, abilities to monitor, control, blah, blah, blah. But it's another thing to direct the specific investment. And in terms of prudency, I mean, I'll tell you from my years of experience, there is no way that your client will ever reflect upon a regulation and say that is an indicia of prudency. I mean, that will be for a future rate case determination. So I just, from SPECO's perspective, the real concern is directing investments that really haven't been thought through. And when you tell a utility in regulation, you have to do this, then it is effectively saying you have to spend the money to get it done. That concerns me. Okay. And my utility.
All right. Thank you, sir. And I think at least on the provide safe, reliable, and affordable service, I think isn't that required by statute? I mean, that's kind of the overall.
It is.
One of the overall requirements of the utilities providing service. So is there? I know Jacob didn't want it because it was too general, and I know I understand Damon's concerns. That it's too directive. I don't know if we can get more general and satisfy everyone. Do we agree, or is there any agreement on whether or not we need 3D? Because if it's already required by statute.
Yeah, I don't know that 3D is required. Like I said, if you view this as a whole, it's kind of maybe reinforcing that if you are increasing. I think there's probably an agreement that there's going to be some increase in monitoring, control, and enabling DERs. We're open to wordsmithing that, but I think D is just saying, but this is still affordable, right? Like these are measures that are going to be done, but you still have to do them within the regulatory parameters that are already there. I agree that we can look at the redlining of this.
Okay. So
see if there's a better middle ground.
Yeah, I would think that everyone would agree that whatever investments are made, a prudency determination would be made during a rate case, as Damon indicated. So I think that kind of goes without saying. So, all right. So we'll, anybody else on this one?
I'll just say, Judge, in addition to obviously feeling like it's general, agree with Damon in terms of concerns too around, trying to direct investments.
Sure. Understood.
And I would just say, I would agree with dropping D because it is reflected in statute. If we want to wordsmith a little bit so that utilities shall demonstrate best efforts to whatever, that may be. I do believe that the difference between the larger utilities and the co-ops and so on is also specified in law, that the commission considers the intrinsic differences in between the different types of utility.
Okay.
So I think that that's covered. I don't think that we're talking about blanket requirements that are one size fits all here,
Okay.
but they are criteria for evaluating an appropriate plan.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Well, okay. At least we salvaged something. I think we agree on we can get rid of D. We'll look forward to everyone's revisions on A through C. All right. Let's see. Yes, Doug.
So if we're directed to do an investment by either rule or the commission, I would assume that there's going to be no prudence review because we've been told to do it, right? Is that, I just want to try to understand what we're talking about here. And it's a little confusing to me.
That's fair. I would think you'd still have to do it in a cost-effective manner, but I understand your point. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I think this topic has come up before, and I think we've discussed that in circumstances where you've been directed to do something, I just don't think it's plausible that anyone would say that it wasn't prudent for you to undertake the project. But as Judge McLean just mentioned, there could certainly be a prudence review for the execution of the project. So I don't think it's like an either or, Doug. I think it's that the discretion that the utility is exercising should be like tested or subject to being tested. To the extent that the utility didn't exercise any discretion in undertaking the project, it just seems sort of like nonsensical to even talk about prudence review and as far as project selection.
All right, so it's only limited to the execution in that instance. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah. And just recognizing that I don't have any power other than to give my opinion.
But I mean, Doug, would you agree that if say say utility is directed to do a project and the project, the estimated cost of the project was $1 million. And when it's all completed, it comes back as, 100 million. Would you agree that, that difference could be, looked at for, whether or not the execution of the project was?
Certainly, people could
Okay.
make arguments, and the utility would be able to describe why it went from $1 million to 100 million, and the 99 million was prudent based on these factors.
Okay. I think we're on the same page then. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think we're on the same page on that. All right. Integrated system planning. Anyone have any concerns with the addition of system? All right. And then Exxon wants to strike B. And staff just wanted to delete the sense in B.
Are we all of a sudden resource constrained to investigate all possible scenarios or something? Come on, guys. That was a joke. I'm sorry.
No.
I've been on camera so you could see the joke on my face. Yeah, that's a pretty ambitious thing there. So I don't have any issue with that.
Okay. All right. Well, good. We're just rolling here. All right. Staff, are you guys okay with striking the whole thing?
I think I would initially say yes, but if you have a different opinion, we'll get back to you on it.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Anybody else on 4? Oh, Andy, go ahead, sir.
Joke aside, I just couldn't resist that opportunity.
No. But levity you can bring is welcome.
Rather than making it just like all possible solutions, maybe instead of striking the whole thing, and this is maybe a question as well, since I can't recall the discussion of this in the work group report, and am not up to speed reading the entire state legislation on this, to move from distribution system plan to sort of electric system plan, but maybe there's a call out that could be relevant around integration of the transmission and distribution components. I know there's mention of PJM and market prices, and so that's kind of already reflected at the somewhat of the bulk power system, but that might be something for the work group to consider.
Okay. All right. Well, right now we'll mark it down as everybody's okay with the deletion, with the understanding that some folks may come back with some other ideas. And Andy, if you guys want to suggest something, that'd be more than welcome. All right. Moving down, staff had an addition, but before we get there, it looks like utilities, at least Exelon, thinks that number 1 would require AMI mandate for all utilities, and right now, I believe it's PE does not have, is the only utility, large utility that does not have AMI. Jessica.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. Jess Reba from PE. I think Exelon kindly echoed our comment here. I think, though my SNAs can correct me if I'm wrong, it actually goes to the hourly load forecasting language that's a bit further down. So I can save my speech for that, or you can scroll a page or two, but.
Yeah, can I come back to you?
Yeah, that's
okay, great. Okay, but I'm assuming that PE would obviously be concerned about any kind of AMI mandate. All right, Jacob. I'm sorry. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was going to say, never mind. You made my speech for me.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
All right, go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify. I think this was another just kind of like mistranslation of where our comment was. I think, they're right that our comment was on E1, not necessarily
Okay.
E1. I think it just got captured under the wrong box.
Okay. All right. So this should be E1. All right. So, all right. Well, John will be harshly reprimanded. All right. Okay. Let's see. So staff included distributed energy resources. I would think that would probably be okay with everyone. And then they added utilities shall report any progress towards modernizing and forecasting methodologies in annual filings related to annual DSP technical conferences. And I know, David, you had some concerns here, sir.
Yeah. My main concerns is that, and I've read the order, and I see that it only provides direction on modernizing, and I'm just, maybe wordsmithing or kind of, reading some, what is the difference between shall account for versus shall incorporate, in language on that, what is the guiding word there, in terms of how they will incorporate the various technologies in. More fundamentally, and this is, I know we've had this long discussions on this in the work group, is whether to have need to have more specific forecasts per different types of technologies, whether that's solar rooftop versus electric vehicles or what have you. Just concerned that the language, as it's stated, is essentially suggests there will be a DER forecast, and it does not provide much direction beyond that. I understand and support the utilities developing and modernizing, and so I actually will support, the bunch of the reporting, and I support where the commission is going on this. But I do think I would like to have more, specificity besides that, they will do in DER forecasts.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Jacob, you got any, JB, you have any response on that?
Yeah, I would say, and I went back and kind of looked through, the several of our reports and the orders as well. And I think where we ultimately landed and what the commission ultimately ordered is reflected here in this, is consistent with the order here. So I guess that's my initial thought. And then the other thought I had in terms of like staff's additions, I agree with staff's additions for 2. I guess my only question is, would that be a regulation clause better fit in the like reporting section of the regulation where we talk about what the utilities report? Don't entirely necessarily not opposed if it does end up in this location, but just again, from a structural perspective, don't know if it makes more sense to have it there. And so maybe it's just something, once we get to that piece, can talk about it there.
Okay, let me ask you, and just in follow up to David's comments, he was concerned that there was only a single DER forecast that would incorporate everything. And he believes that's not adequate. Is that your reading of the language, and if it is it? I mean, do you need to do multiple forecasts? I guess would be my question.
So I think, again, looking back at the final report, we certainly had discussions around that. I think where we landed as the consensus is, the language that's reflected in here of not necessarily specifying specific forecast, but that there is a DER forecast. And so I think as it's framed here and the language here, it's broad enough to, I think, create some of that flexibility of if a utility has the capabilities to break it out and present it as broken out, they can. But if a utility only has the ability to present it at first as kind of just one, they're also able to do that. And so I think, in short, the language I think is consistent with the order and where the working group landed, but still creates the flexibility that as utilities develop those abilities, and if they have those capabilities to produce them independently, that they would be able to.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Bartlett.
Yes, this is one where we, referring back to the discussions we've had, actually, I don't agree with Jacob that this very general statement that they shall modernize their forecasting that's what's in the order, but there's not a lot of specificity there. We did a lot of discussion about that, and in fact, again, going back to the notes, and we actually have with Ms. Schwartz on the call, the presentation in the technical conference by her and Ms. Frick specified that, or identified the fact that DER forecasting by category of DER is essential. So I'm agreeing with David Cathan that this incorporating DER's forecast is not the same as forecasting by specific category of DER, which is actually essential. The different categories of DER, as was also pointed out in the technical conference, have different characteristics in terms of their impact on load, and the timing of that, their rate of adoption, and other characteristics that are unique to them. And so lumping them all together into one incorporated reference or forecast doesn't give the kind of information that would provide adequate distribution system planning for those categories of DER. But again, we have someone on the call who actually had brought direct experience with that.
All right, thank you, sir. Ron.
Yeah, I agree with what Al was saying. I would also note that the DER forecast is related to a lot of these issues, and it will be really challenging to demonstrate reasonable planning practices, in my mind, without additional granularity in the regulation. When we're talking about efforts and investments related to monitoring and control and integrating DERs, that's tied to your DER forecast. And if you're not being specific with your DER forecast, you're not going to be able to sufficiently address some of the other areas in the regulations.
Okay. All right. David had a couple other issues. Namely, there were a couple of DERs that were not included, namely the bidirectional electric vehicles and DER aggregations. Is there any objections or concerns with adding those in to D1?
So I guess again, going back to I think where are things necessary in regulation, EVs is already listed. So I don't know if we need to add EVs again. And an aggregation is just an aggregation of some of these things that are listed. And so if these things are listed, I'm not sure if it's necessary to, again, list something that would just be capturing already what's there.
Let me respond to that.
Please, sir.
I take your point on the EVs. I just wanted to tie it in with the Drive Act, such that their bi-directional vehicle systems was part of what the Drive Act was doing. I don't have a strong opinion on whether it absolutely has to be in here. But as far as DER aggregation, I think that since the DER aggregation may not be maybe directed and be developed by a third party, in which the knowledge of how much is out there and what is the type and how they'll be used, I think it would be important for the utilities to understand, and when they do their forecasting and do their planning.
All right, thanks. Jacob, any response on that one?
Yeah, I'll say on the EVs, we may even be aligned, and maybe it's just a parentheses that gets added to the EVs, because I think something we continually have said is EVs sit both in DER forecast and load forecast, because they're only in DER forecast if they can actually contribute to the grid and export to the grid, which is that V2G scenario that you're talking about. And so maybe we can add that clarification there. And I see what you're saying in terms of aggregations, and we can take that back. I don't think we'd be wholly opposed to that, but just recognizing again, how does that fit in there? How do all those things piece together? I think we'd have to think a little bit more.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jacob. All right. Appreciate you guys willing to consider that. All right. All right. I know OPC and Al both weighed in on this. I just want to make sure that you've hit your points on this before we move on. All right.
Yeah, I guess the comment which I haven't heard discussed yet, the bullets there,
Sure.
When I read the order, I feel like the proposal there was to apply these to both DER and load, so hourly forecasting. I appreciate the addition of the modernizing forecasting methodology on the reporting section there, so I think that's taken care of
Okay.
a bit. So I would just recommend the conduct hourly forecasting be added here for clarity. And the other one that was called out is related more to within the list of specific DERs, there's the inclusion of distributed energy resources, which kind of is a self-referential thing. So just clarifying that language might be helpful.
Okay. All right. Jacob, any concerns with those two bullet points Andy just referenced? Looking at these two.
Yeah, so just double checking, you're talking about the modernized forecasting methodologies, conduct hourly forecasting, and need to incorporate.
Right. Yeah, and I think he was okay with this had been addressed. I think it was just more the second two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was aligned with what because I think the commission ordered supports the Exelon proposal, and I think those are the 3 points that we had. So I think it would be appropriate to incorporate them, but then we can take that back just to verify.
Okay.
To make sure that that's good. And again, obviously we can take it back.
All right. Thank you. All right. So you said speed launch repetitive. Also states we need to consider the clause. All right. So we'll look for some clarifications and some wordsmithing on D. All right. So moving on to E, Exelon proposed some edits, and Sierra Club had some concerns on this one as well. Lack of detail in forecasting. And David, you want to kind of just give a brief overview?
Yeah, sir. I'm just actually reading. I apologize.
Oh, you're fine.
I think the bottom line is, is similar to the comments are made on the DER forecast side, which is that, the direction is in the regulations is fine as far as it goes, but it is not really modern at this point, and the direction is just a direction to do something. And I personally, I would love to have more direction, but I understand that the order doesn't say much.
Okay. Okay, but you would, at a minimum, you'd like to see, the forecasts have the require, certain characteristics.
Yes.
And you reference the 8760 hourly loads, things of that nature. That's what you're looking
Yes.
for.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Jacob, I know I keep picking on you. Go ahead, Al. Sir, if you're speaking, we can't hear you, sir.
Sorry. Yeah, just looking at the order, this is the place where the order says as a starting point for regulations. Now, does that mean that we leave the regulations at this level of generality and those regulations become the starting point and in 3 years we come back and try to do it better? Or does that mean that the regulations that were drafted are a starting point for the discussion that we're having and that they could be amplified so that I don't see it. The question is, does that language preclude our asking for more detail? As example, referring back to the technical conference, there were some specific principles of adequate load forecasting for a modern grid that were enunciated in that technical conference, but they're not reflected here. It just simply says modernize, and it names some areas, but it doesn't really give specificity of what load forecasting could be. And we have that information, and we were given that information. The commission paid for us to get that information. And so are we able to use it given the generality of the language, or do we just have to write regulations that we leave for a few years and see that they're not enough and then we have to come back and do it all over again?
Well, I'm looking at page 9 of the order, and it says, as a starting point for regulations, the commission agrees with the Exelon Utilities proposal to modernize forecasting methodologies.
That's the part I was quoting also.
Sure.
So it's a starting point for regulations. So can we continue the discussion and have the regulations be more than that general statement? Modernize?
Well, I think we start with what we go from Exelon's proposal at a minimum, and then potentially and go from there.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we can.
Exelon's proposal says modern.
Clarify, or maybe potentially add some more meat to the bones, if that's what it sounds like that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, in this, both the DER and load forecasting, I think that's what we're looking for.
Okay.
I guess I would just raise, Judge, obviously we've spent over a year now talking about these topics, right? And obviously we landed on both, many of these topics being non-consensus. We put those, positions in front of the commission, and the commission's made their decision. And so I think that, as we're developing this regulation, we should be, looking to implement the order and the direction that the commission's given us. We have very limited time to get this done by May. And so, we've worked through this process, right? We've worked as a team and as a group to develop these recommendations. And, I don't know if it's in our best interest as a team to be able to get this over the finish line while still trying to continue to rehash some of the discussions that have happened when we have a order from the commission giving us direction.
That's a fair point.
The order, the commission says this is a starting point. Does that mean that we can't talk about these other specificities, or we just have to take it as it is in the order? The order in almost all of its sections is fairly high level of generality. And yes, in consensus, Jacob, I'll say it again, consensus only exists if the utilities always agree. The utilities haven't agreed to a lot of the more progressive perspectives that were brought forward by the technical conference, by stakeholders. But if you don't agree to them, then you don't have consensus, and therefore we end up with regulations that are only what the utilities want, which is perhaps not adequate.
Well, again, you just go back, harken back what John said, in the first meeting, and what I indicated in the beginning of this one. We're kind of bound by what's in the order, and I agree that it's a little general in spots. So, as a starting point, we have to go with what the Exelon utilities propose. Now, to the extent we can clarify, potential issues in there, great. But if you go much beyond that, I think we're going kind of against the intent of the order. But you're free to propose some changes if need be. Ron.
I think you just answered the question.
Okay.
I think we see this as a gray area, and we'll be offering some red lines.
Okay, excellent. All right. So Exelon wants to get rid of this longer term objective. Any concerns on that?
I believe that, yeah, this was an OPC thing. No, yes. Again, I'm sorry, but go ahead, Ron.
No, go ahead.
No, it's just, again, we're not adding specificity, we're taking specificity out. It's just the whole thing gets weaker and weaker as we go along if we do all these things.
Okay. All right.
Al, were you saying that OPC took this out?
Oh, this suggestion originally came from OPC.
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess maybe Jacob has his hand up to. What can you explain this, Jacob? Why you'd want to remove this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the whole objective of regulation is to align with what we've been directed by the commission, right? And so in looking back at the final orders, this was never a consensus recommendation, or in the final, any of the reports, this was never a consensus recommendation in any of the orders by the commission. This wasn't something that was specified as a longer term objective. So again, in terms of aligning regulation with what we've been ordered and directed to do, this didn't feel appropriate to be included as it wasn't something that was directed by the commission. And so wanting to just align the regulation with the actual requirements that have been put forward by the commission.
Okay. So you're just in a nutshell, it's outside the scope of the order.
Right.
Okay. And is it fair to say because this particular objective wasn't included in Exelon's proposal?
That, or it wasn't, stated by the commission in the order as, an additional objective. The commission talks about, reporting out on it, but not specifically as any type of long-term objective.
All right.
And you don't see this as a prerequisite for providing safe and cost-effective service and developing DER forecasts?
I don't see how having a long-term objective in one thing is directly connected to either of those two things.
Speaking to the need to modernize your forecasts and understanding that you don't have this capability currently.
Again, I will just say, obviously, if there's language around safe, reliable service in the statutes, that's what drives this. And this is language that isn't reflected by the commission in any of the orders.
Okay,
we can take that back.
Okay. All right, very good.
We obviously don't agree with that.
Okay. All right. Next one, on 3, the utilities, Exelon included the language in purple. So fit modernizing forecasting methodologies including feasibility of eventually developing more advanced capabilities. All right. Any concerns with this? Yes. Go ahead, Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but again, this reflects a pattern. So the eventually developing part just again weakens the intent. And so pretty much all of the fact that we're dealing with the lowest common denominator if it's only consensus items that the utilities have agreed to, and then the utilities want to take out and make things more iffy. Maybe is it feasible to eventually develop? That's pretty wishy-washy. So again, I'm just flagging this pattern of we're coming up with regulations that are I think, the lowest common denominator, and then trying to weaken them further. Sorry.
Understood. It looks like that specific language is coming from the order on the second to last paragraph on page 9.
Correct. We were just updating the regulation to reflect the specific language in the order, just trying to keep that consistency.
All right. All right. Anybody else on this? And Al, I understand your concerns. All right. Moving on. All right. Let's see. On F, Sierra Club wants to see some more detail. And OPC says we're missing a consensus item on the publishing of the maps. All right. And looks like Exelon's saying F1 is consistent with the order. All right. This is where, this is the audience participation portion of the show. Go ahead. You don't have to raise your hand, Jacob.
I'll say I don't entirely disagree with OPC regarding the maps. I think that was a consensus item. I guess my only question is, and this is just me not knowing COMAR, is I know some of that also happened in the interconnection working group, right? There's a lot of discussions of hosting capacity maps. I think a point we made a lot during the last phase was a lot of that stuff is really about interconnection more so than it is planning, right? From a maps perspective. Obviously, hosting capacity assessments are more DSP. And so I guess my only flag is that already phrased somewhere in COMAR? And is it then necessary for us to restate if that's somewhere else?
Okay, that's fair. All right. What about David's comments on the lack of detail?
I think just going back to our point is the language there is consistent with the order, and so just creating the regulation with that consistency.
Okay. All right. All right. So Al, you had some concerns on this one. Oh, somebody wants to join me.
Yeah, actually, my one concern here was that I think that it's a P and not a Q, but
okay, that's.
But if you look at in my actual written comments, I actually, which I think DeAndre has done in the chat, took out that language that he cited was from the COMAR.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I would again, this is a place where it can't be done within the context of the order, but where I would like to see some specificity on how that reserve capacity on a line-by-line basis is calculated. That's not specified in the COMAR, but we can't do that here. So,
okay.
Wishful thinking.
Okay. No problem. All right. Okay. Ron, you guys also had some concern or comments on this one as well.
Yeah. I think the P versus Q on the other interconnection portion, I spoke with some of the interconnection working group members, and they're sort of looking and hoping that the DSP working group can advise on. I think I think what Jacob mentioned, like maybe I didn't read it for the maps reference, so maybe they have already, like you said, Jacob, on the interconnection working group, they are kind of concerned with that front and center. And so I can double check on if that's already covered there. But for the how should the feeder level, calculation that the order recommends be completed on the DSP, how should that be done? This reference to, chapter 6Q or chapter 9, whatever it is in draft state on their end. And when I reviewed that, I think it's going through approval, but I think there's still time to make some adjustments. And maybe theirs is not the proper place to be adjusted, but rather than us referencing that, where if you read it, the quote I think I have in here is, starts off good with which is specifying there should be a procedure for calculating hosting capacity, but then it goes into like accounting for either the gross peak or gross minimum load, which I would wonder if the utilities are typically looking at it at a net load basis, is what I would imagine if you're taking like your SCADA measurements. I don't know how you would go and reconstitute a gross load, so I would kind of want to pick that apart, but we need to maybe discuss with the working group there what they were thinking. But then really similar to what we've been discussing around terms like modernize or holistic, like engineering best practice is kind of vague, or good engineering practice is what they reference. And so I think some enumeration of the expected steps for calculating hosting capacity should be put forth. And then if it's an evolution to get there from where the utilities are at, then they can, as we've discussed previously, sort of ask for a waiver or explain why they're unable to do that. But I think there's enough interest in this. It is one of the most critical pieces. So like having a clear process and procedures document, maybe it's referenced here and developed elsewhere, but I'd leave it for future discussion.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Andy. All right, Jacob, do you have any thoughts on that or on OPC's comments generally?
No, can take that one back. I mean, I think like Andy said, there's probably some coordination that needs to happen between what's here and what's in interconnection regulation.
Okay. And I'm sure John will be able to shed some light on that as well, because I believe he's leading that work group. All right, let's see. Moving down to 2, Exelon wants it to read, utilities shall report on the status of improvements in annual DSP filings and stakeholder engagement, yada, yada, yada. And Al doesn't like, it says it's too vague. All right. So Al, what would you like to see specific? I mean, do you have specifics that you'd like to see in this?
Sorry, let me just look at what they're proposing and what's.
Sure.
And it's again, this on the status of improvements, rather work to develop. And one is a work to develop housing capacity improvements, and then in a sense it would be possible here to specify what some of those hosting capacity improvements were. For example, availability of information on the status of different circuits, the frequent updating of hosting capacity maps, those sorts of things that we talked about. They're not excluded in any way by the order. But then again, here the proposed change from the utilities actually turns this from something that is to be done to something that is to be reported on, which could be reporting on not doing very much. So it's the same tendency again, but this would be a place where there could be more specificity, as with some of the other topics we've discussed.
Okay. All right. And thank you, sir. And again, to the extent that parties think that it's not specific enough, any edits or specific language would be welcomed. Again, keep it in mind with the directive we've gotten from the commission. Yes, Damon.
Yeah, I must be missing something, so someone probably needs to educate me. But we went through a considerable rulemaking effort in the interconnection context, which really brought to enactment a number of rules dealing with hosting capacity plans and multiple changes to mapping and everything else. So I'm just curious, and I must be missing something, because it just feels like we're discussing topics that have either already been discussed or are being facilitated in a different work stream. Maybe someone can enlighten me. I apologize.
No, don't, because this is, I don't know what's going on in other work groups. So to the extent that I certainly don't want to duplicate efforts.
I could take a crack. I do believe there was hosting capacity was a topic identified that it went beyond interconnection and needed to also be addressed in DSP by the work group leader. And I believe the commission.
But if I recall correctly, I thought rules were specifically developed as how to introduce and present hosting capacity plans and have them evaluated by the commission. Am I
And I
missing?
believe there were
Am I
other
missing anything?
aspects that were brought into the DSP process.
So can we just reference that? I guess what maybe the missing link for me is it seems like a lot of work was already done. Can we just carry that over and reference the fact that a process was developed to address these opportunities and or concerns, and leave it at that? What more? I guess I'm missing the integration opportunity. Yeah.
I guess the issue is that your distribution system planning process impacts hosting capacity. And so they're interrelated, and you can't just look at hosting capacity. You have to look at the processes as well.
Yeah, I was just going to point out, I mean, I certainly agree that if and when it makes sense to just reference those other regulations around a specific method or hosting capacity requirement. I mean, clearly there's hosting capacity upgrade plans that are on a separate track and sort of meant to deal with a specific issue of DER integration. But as Ron mentioned, I think the interplay in the DSP realm is a bit broader, because then you're dealing with factors of how does the load forecast and other flexible, you might think of electric vehicles, which could impact your minimum daytime loading and your ability to mitigate constraints by executing, load shifting plans or investments. And so just being able to think about those broader contexts, I don't think is going to happen in those other more narrow interconnection dockets. But it's a good point that, I think, as Jacob also indicated, we need to maybe have either a discussion or just back and forth with that group and say, because like I said, the indication I heard was they're certainly for certain parts of it wanting the DSP working group to weigh in. I'm not sure what contours that is and if that's shared by everybody, but that's just what I've heard from a few discussions.
Yeah, I would just say it'd be helpful if other working groups are counting on us to actually let us know. Damon, did that explanation help at all, sir?
No, I appreciate that. It may be John Burkowski. I don't think he's on the call now, but maybe he has some thoughts, given that he's leading that other effort as well. I'm just trying to streamline our efforts to the extent that we can capitalize on work that was already done and also enacted in rules. So there's no conflicting rules established here.
Yeah, John's down in Annapolis. He had to go down and testify on some bills. So
lucky him.
Yes. Okay. All right, Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, lucky him. Yeah, and I appreciate what Damon's saying about not having the wires crossed here between groups. As I recall, the parts of interconnection of hosting capacity that I was specifically referring to here in our group were ones that had to do with the availability of information that would help distributed energy resource developers understand where the opportunities for interconnection were. And that would have to do with both capacity, but also the updating of maps to reflect those changes in capacity, evaluation of the relative cost of interconnection in a particular area, and those sorts of factors that were, I don't think, but I'm not participating in the interconnection working group, but I don't believe those were addressed in the specific findings of that working group, and they did bounce some of these considerations to our working group.
Okay. All right, so what I'll do is I will touch base with John after this meeting and see what exactly the interconnection work group has done on this front in an effort to avoid duplication and streamline things. All right, let's see. Anybody else on this? I don't know how far we're going to get today. All right, moving on to G. You can see the Exelon proposal. Utilities shall develop as appropriate locational value study. few comments from Al and OPC. Looks like Al's looking for some clarity. And OPC is looking for some more specifics. And it's not, there's no reference to the stakeholder engagement process. All right. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of thoughts. I think in terms of the clarity that Al was looking for, I think since it says for each planning cycle, at least to me that's clear, but that could also just be me coming from the utility background. So I felt like that language, Al, kind of was addressing what you were looking at, but happy to hear otherwise if you don't think that addresses it. As for some of the OPC comments, I think obviously there's a whole metric section, so I don't think metrics are appropriate here. And same thing with stakeholder engagement. We have the whole kind of stakeholder engagement and reporting process in future sections of the regulation. And so any discussion of that, I think, is more appropriate there, right? We already built the stakeholder engagement structure. And so, wouldn't look to include additional language here that overlaps with, the consensus engagement process that we had developed.
Thanks, Jacob. Ethan, welcome back.
I heard locational value of DERs was being discussed. So wanted to just first address CPSR. A one-time locational value of DER program would not work. It has to be iterative. Look, the grid is it is changing constantly. We are doing things with it. Customers add equipment. Every interconnection changes. That's why interconnection studies are not permanent. It is a constantly changing grid, and also policy needs to change. So locational value has to be done multiple times. Regarding the locational value assessment, OPC's comment about grid needs completely missing. That is actually very much an intention of locational value. That would be a part of the value stack, and among other things, including hosting capacity, other policy factors that you would want to program in. And to OPC's comment about stakeholder engagement, probably tomorrow, all of you will be receiving an invitation to BG&E's kickoff to their developing our locational value of DER framework. We intend to start stakeholder engagement with a large meeting of whoever wants to attend, and we'll go on from there. But we are sending it to all the work groups, all the work groups. The interconnection, energy storage, and distribution system planning work groups have all been invited. We are also sitting down with other groups, but we wanted to send out a broad invitation so that everyone would have an opportunity. In general, we are looking at I'll give you just a short version of, we are looking at a value stack of both grid needs and policy drivers. This way we can program in Maryland's policy goals into these locational values in a direct way, in a transparent way. And, your input on those values is highly appreciated and sought after here. And we are hoping to have a framework completed in July with a sample of substations, of BG&E substations, that we will have a variety that we can work with, and then we will be submitting the framework for commission approval after that. So I hope you don't mind taking a little ride with me there, but we do believe that this program has great value to the grid and to meeting state policy goals, and we will be reaching out shortly. So.
All right, thanks, Ethan.
That was a lot at once.
No, it's good stuff. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. I think that you captured what the intention was. Our concern here was that the language, a locational value study, and I think this is what Ethan's referring to, seemed to contradict implementation of locational value of capabilities on an ongoing basis. And so some reconciling those.
Why don't we just make it plural? And I mean, again, if Exelon agrees, it could just read, utilities shall develop as appropriate locational value studies.
I would actually change it to, you know, we went down this path and exactly because of this problem, that's why we called it a framework. And we that way you have a methodology that you're applying on a regular basis. Just that gets you away from the problem of.
I guess, yeah, and I think, Your Honor, I think that that suggestion is good. The develop as appropriate seems to make it conditional, as opposed to having it being what Ethan was describing was an ongoing process. Because again, it's certainly possible to imagine a circumstance where someone says, "Oh, we didn't think it was appropriate, so we didn't do it." Well, okay. So I think that some slightly different language that utilities shall incorporate the location of value studies as part of the planning process, something like that, without the conditionality of as appropriate.
We like appropriate because we'd rather be appropriate than inappropriate. But
that's wonderful. I guess the question is, what are the criteria and who determines it?
that will be the subject of a stakeholder engagement. We have
right, but I just wouldn't.
OPC is
I wouldn't want to
forward
build
to
in the conditionality undefined in regulations at this point.
Yeah, I'm going to just straight up. This will be the first distribution locational value framework developed in the country. So we're kind of out in we're out in open waters right now. So perhaps not being too prescriptive at this point would be the best, so that we can actually develop this rather than deciding what it's going to be before we've actually poked at it.
Sure, that's fine. I still don't think you need the conditional language.
Okay.
Well. Okay. Andy or Rod, go. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Well, you see, Summer, we had raised their hand, so go ahead.
Okay. Summer.
Okay, I forgot to unmute myself again. So I think the whole grid needs and locational value assessment discussion focuses a lot on just the locational value assessment piece of it. So are we going to get a grid needs assessment document, like filing, or, you know, in the plan, is there going to be a specific grid assessment kind of discussion or topics? I don't think that's covered here. So I just wanted to highlight that. Maybe this ties a little bit to the granularity discussion earlier. So I was hoping if you want to provide a detailed comment again. We didn't provide that at our initial comments, but what we would like to see ideally is a grid needs assessment, and then the criteria used to evaluate different non-wire solutions, and kind of have a transparency around what that screening criteria is.
All right. Thanks, Samara. Ethan, you had your hand up, sir?
And I put it back down. But thank you for checking.
I'll add, mine is kind of, my comment was similar to Summerweed's, in that, you know, in the written comment there, we were pointing out that the grid needs and locational value, this portion of the draft regs seem to just refer to the locational value assessment. And whether it's a framework or whether it's a recurring study, I understand and agree, Ethan, that, you know, at least as far as it sounds like you're conceiving of it, a locational value assessment would implicitly incorporate where the locational grid needs are. But I think it does merit, if we're going to call it that, maybe we just refer to it as a grid needs and locational value study versus just to make it clear. But I would agree with Summerweed that more detailed explanation or enumeration of the base expectation, I would call it, the grid needs as they've been evaluated in this process is a core component of a DSP process. So I think it should be reflected. And it does get back to, I think, the granularity and data access or data conversation we kind of teed up earlier and we're discussing. I gave some examples of, peak load and rated values of transformers and feeders and as an example. And this is one of those areas where that would be pertinent, because I think if we're just looking at feeder level and granular information for a constraint, I think somebody else on the call today mentioned there's lots of things that may not be a constraint yet or reach that threshold of a more detailed planning assessment from the utilities, but nevertheless provide useful information for how to target future developments.
All right. Thank you, Jacob. I was gonna ping you.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess some thoughts. Obviously, I think when you look back at the reports, we didn't dive too much into grid needs within this section, but I think where we did talk about it was within the straw proposal, right? In terms of what would actually be shared, and so, looking at what we had, had built into that document that we landed on consensus in terms of what was published. That talks to the forecast that we would be sharing, the system constraints that we would be sharing, those prospective solutions that we'd be sharing. So I think some of that detail within that straw proposal could maybe be reflected here in terms of what would be shared, but obviously that kind of proposal had some of that detail in terms of what that would look like and then what information would be shared. And to Andy's point, obviously the commission also ruled on the, I think there was a general agreement of sharing data at the substation level, but only, when there was a constraint at the feeder level. And so I think there's some connections there that we can make here as well. But I would just say we can look to the straw proposal and some of the information there is, either just have it in that section or just have it reflected both places.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, amazingly, I'm going to agree with Jacob. This section on grid needs and locational value is right now. It's only about locational value. When we were talking about granularity up above, we basically said, oh, this issue of identifying constraints would be reflected when we get to the section on grid needs, but it's not. And so I think that bringing some of that information forward, actually, one comment was made that said, Order 91-91490 clearly states that the details on how to identify situations where constraints are identified shall be proposed by the work group in regulations. So this is the place where we would do that, and I think we need to do it.
Okay. Should this be done in the same section in G, or should this be the grid needs and locational value? Should we split those up?
You mean have G become G and H?
Yes, sir. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, since we've already got Samarit agrees with that. I mean, I don't know if it's appropriate or not. I was just throwing that out there.
Yeah, structurally, I can't comment, but I think that it does need to be reflected under grid needs and locational value, whether it's one becomes, couldn't it just become 3 and 4 or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But again, we can.
But anyway, agreed, it should be here, and
okay. All right. All right.
So see what Jacob brings forward.
All right. Okay. All right. We will look for that then. Sounds like we actually agree on that. All right. Possible solutions to grid needs. Al, you're concerned about the lack of criteria for evaluation, and we touched on this earlier about the potential reference to a benefit cost analysis, and OPC was looking for more direction as well around the type of information that should be included and shared. Jacob, do you have any response on this one?
Yeah, I'll say, I mean, I think what's there reflects, pretty close to the order, right? In terms of additional, criteria for non-wire solution, that was certainly a discussion we had in the working group, but I think the commission came down pretty clear in their order that, they want them to be evaluated. They want utilities to present, the alternatives that they considered. And they also, include the idea of utility can pursue PIMs. Not that saying that piece has to be in regulation, but like they put that forward as a way to incentivize non-wire solutions. So I think that the order was pretty clear in terms of what direction they wanted to go with non-wires, and I think the language here, reflects that.
Okay. All right.
Jake, are you referring to the language as amended with that amendment?
Al, are you saying the amendment to reflect the grid needs?
The one that I'm looking at, the thing when you have up has in red that including criteria used to evaluate solutions.
I was talking about H. I thought we
Yeah,
were
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about-
We're on H right now, sir.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's okay. All right. Does that, I don't know if that helps you or not, sir. I mean, I'm sure I'm pretty confident it doesn't. Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
I'll just note that this is related to kind of the issue above. So I think when we redline, we'll connect the pieces.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Jumping down to I, not sure. Okay, so staff, this is staff's language. The DSP plan shall include the criteria used to evaluate possible solutions, including any cost benefit or cost effectiveness considerations. Al, again, referenced the benefit cost analysis. OPC was looking for a specific non-wire solutions reference criteria. All right. Anyone want to respond on the staff edits or the other comments made?
I think we want to take the staff edits back on I, but the one question that kind of came to mind as I kind of first saw it was, given what H2 says in terms of utilities presenting the rationale for solutions and alternatives, is this language necessary? So that's just a thought I'll put out there. Like I said, we'll take it back and talk further about it, but that was just kind of something that came to mind of, are we creating unnecessary or repetitive regulation?
Right, or okay, so it's H2 and I repetitive.
Go
ahead, Al.
Samrat has her hand up.
Okay.
No, so good question, Jacobs. I just wanted to, kind of provide some kind of specificity as to what considerations should be made, should be included in the rationale, I guess.
Gotcha, that's helpful.
All right. It does seem like it's a little repetitive. But again, that's not me. That's just me. All right.
Yeah. My suggestion was if it repeated, it would repeat cost benefit analysis in both places, criteria and cost benefit analysis in both places. Because one could present a rationale that has no cost benefit analysis in it and no, the criteria can be, this is the way we like it, or we get to build more stuff or whatever. I mean, I actually bemoan the fact that the regs themselves aren't specifying criteria, but they're not. So I think having the criteria be put forward clearly is necessary.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Anybody? So just Al, you don't think that they're repetitive? Is that correct?
No, because there's no mention of criteria or cost benefit.
Okay.
If you take out that And in neither section is there any reference to those.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody else? OPC, Andy, Ron, you guys had a couple comments on this?
Yeah, I would say I agree with kind of what Summer Wheat and Al were kind of on the track of, which I do think maybe H2 and I here there is a relationship, and that's what we tried to call out. But what we see as a lack right now of sort of the specificity that the non-wire solutions should be carried forth in sort of a more quantitative fashion to evaluate actual costs and benefits versus, you know, we've seen a lot of activity where it's sort of just, well, we have a certain type of constraint and, you know, a battery is not going to be able to achieve that. So therefore we looked at it and we moved on without doing a more full, to the point of, you know, having like the holistic approach to things, which is, I think, even if it's not going to live in the final guidance, which I would go back to that point actually and say, reading back through the order, it was listed as a consensus item. So I think whether or not it's like the right place to keep it in that portion of the regulations, the holistic nature of trying to evaluate these things, I think it's just useful to specify both in H and in H. I think it's more about it's related to sort of the DER forecast component. Like if we're only doing one scenario, is that really reflecting, like circling back to, okay, there's heightened locational value for increased deployment, which has a feedback loop to sort of greater DER deployment in that geographic area. And that itself could be like an iteration on the DER scenario component. I'm not saying that that's, you know, that's obviously a nuanced point, but it is a reality. And so depending on those cascading factors, like how much, what is your DER scenario? What are you including in your possible non-wire solution bucket? Like what's that iteration going to look like, taking stakeholder feedback? And then how is the utility expected to screen it with this reference directly to cost benefit or the emerging locational value framework?
All right. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I know we don't want to go there in this meeting, but I do note that the order did mention the development of performance incentive mechanisms. We talked about it a little bit and then we didn't. It's not something that we're going to do here, but I just flag again the importance of that discussion at some point, because we're talking about a shifting of business model here for distribution system planning, management, development, and investment. And that changes the incentive structures, and appropriate performance incentive mechanisms really will need to be a part of that so that the utilities feel comfortable making the change in approach. But we've skimmed over it. It's interesting to me that it just did make its way into order 91490.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. All right. Looks like no one had any comments on J. Is that still the case? All right. All right. Good enough for me. All right. All right. On K, program and project design. All right. All right. Exxon doesn't know where this was referenced in the order or in the work group. I can't speak to this. Go ahead, Mr. Kathan.
Well, I just while the previous conversation was going on, I was just checking. This is a component of the Jade process map.
Okay.
This is explicitly, you look at the graphic, it does say program and project design is one of the core components.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to clarify, not disagreeing that K or L are not in the Jade process map, they are. We never talked about them as a working group, right? And so looking back through our last two reports, looking back through the orders, you know, we didn't discuss these pieces, right? And so not very clear in terms of where this language was developed. I don't know if this was just developed by John in terms of a recommendation, but obviously since it wasn't in any of our reports, it wasn't ordered on by the commission, not really clear then how at least we're recommending regulation language here if we don't have any directive from the commission in terms of the order here.
Well, the commission did direct the use of the J process.
Right, but we didn't discuss these as a working group to develop any type of recommendation, any type of consensus, any type of proposal in front of the commission. These were two areas that we never touched on.
Well, now is the time, right?
Don't know if we have enough time between now and May, but maybe.
All right. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, Jason, I just wanted, we do recall that there was some discussion, there was a proposal, I think, that consultants be included at a certain threshold or a certain level or something like that. We had discussion about that, and you guys didn't agree to that, and you said that you really needed discretion to manage the process yourselves, which ultimately everyone agreed with. I think this section just reflects that kind of discussion that we did have. It wasn't about all aspects of construction and procurement and so on and so forth, but there was a discussion about whether there should be some constraints put on the utility's ability to choose how they get the job done, and we agreed that that wasn't appropriate.
Yeah, I think I remember that conversation. I think it may have been specific to like IT systems and IT consultants or contractors.
Yeah, that was one of Paul's suggestions on the IT issue. I mean, this is, Jacob, let me ask you, I mean, is this, I understand that at least in K, that it may not have been in the order, but is this, you know, and I don't know how or why John got this language in here, but I mean, is it problematic? I mean, it kind of, I don't want to say it states the obvious, but
yeah, I mean, I think obviously, given we didn't see where this came from, we didn't dive too deeply into it, so we can take it back, especially K and L. I mean, I think just my first read through of K, it seems pretty generic. I think there's certainly more questions in terms of L and, you know, what's being factored in there, but we can take that back more. You know, we really just, again, given the limited time frame to turn around comments for this week, it was more of a flag of where did these kind of come from and trying to track down where they may have originated from.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Yeah, because I would agree with you. It seems pretty generic. On the L, again, you guys had the same, Exelon had the same comments as to where this came from. And Al had some concerns about the specificity on this. Assumptions. Shows us actual versus goals, objectives. So we never talked about this, how the results are assessed. I could have sworn we did. Maybe it didn't make it into the order. Same thing here, Jacob, in terms of, did you guys do a deep dive on this?
I could have missed this one. I didn't think I saw it, but again,
I thought we had, but
or maybe it was in a final report, but not the orders. I tried to look through both the order or the reports as well, but again, just timing wise, may have missed it.
Sure. Yeah, and if you could take it back and look to see if this, at least in number 1, L1, A through C, I mean, it doesn't. Again, it looks general. I guess probably too general for Al's for Al. And rate case filings. And I thought the order referenced something about the rate cases. That's the report. But again, I could be mistaken. I don't. Work group agreed. All right, so on rate cases referenced a few times. There's a consensus item on page 4, paragraph 3 on resource costs and capabilities. Talks about the work group agreed that the utility contracting decisions should be left to the utility discretion and DSP. Maybe that's what we were talking about before, but would remain subject to review in rate cases. Then on page 7, first full paragraph, future rate case filings should provide explanations for projects that don't reconcile with electric system plans and annual utility filings and the final DSP workgroup plan as described in step 5. And then there's one more reference that just talks about utilities proposing PIMs in rate cases. So does that, at least Jacob, on the rate case filing, or is that? Yeah, on the rate case filings, you see where I'm talking, sir?
Yeah, I think the language in 2 makes sense, but then I guess, did the order define the A through D piece?
I think we know the answer to that is no. No, I mean, I'm sure it doesn't. My guess is that John was seeking to add some specificity in terms of what the explanations should require. But again, that is purely a guess.
We can take that one back and add more specific comments for that one by next week.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Yes, Samarit.
Just initial comments, generally in agreement with what's in 2.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. All right. So how many pages do we have to go? We've got, I think I'd like to try and get through as much of this one as 4 as we can. Would it be okay if we took a quick 5-minute break and came back at 2:50? All right, good. All right, that's what we shall do. All right, we'll see you all back here in a bit. We'll see you at 2:50. I'm sorry. Sorry, took a little bit longer. I got sidetracked there. All right. 20.1504. Yes, sir, Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was like you looking for a rate case, and there was a comment on the section above the last one in terms of metrics, in terms of reporting. Let me.
Yeah, it says commission. It's on page
Yeah.
11, or page 11 says the commission encourages utilities to creatively support state policy goals with NWS alternatives for utilities, for which utilities may propose performance incentive mechanisms in rate cases.
Okay, right. But there was something about. I'm sorry. I've just got to go. I'm running multiple things at once here.
Oh, you're
Sorry.
good.
The section on the last piece in, it was L above, assessing results. Yeah, it basically, it listed under L1, assessing results of the plans,
Yes, sir.
included performance versus assumptions, performance versus goals and objectives, and lessons learned, but it doesn't refer to the metrics that we're going to spend so much time trying to work on. But reporting specifically against metrics is the most appropriate and concrete way to evaluate progress. That's why metrics exist, and so leaving metrics out of this section in terms of reporting or assessing results seems like we're blowing off the whole process of establishing metrics, which I think is inappropriate.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. I added your note in there. So, all right. Moving on to 15.04. All right. Al and Mr. Cathan, you guys both had some opening salvos here.
Yeah, this section mixes the plan development and reporting. I mean, it seems that it's trying to take the basic content of the straw man, and which is of course what we need to do, and put it into the regs. But in several places, for example, in C1, A, and B, it refers to publishing the plan. And then it talks about and plan report frequency, but then in D, it talks about development of the final plan. And then when you actually get to E and F, it basically is talking about plan development. And I think my overall comment was that when we all worked together on the straw man and finally finished it, the straw man process was to be a development of a plan, not a report. The idea was that there would be assumptions presented and then input, and then there would be a plan presented and then input, and then there would be a technical conference and additional input, and then a final plan would be developed. So that's different from a reporting process. That's the actual plan development process. But this whole section seems to mix the two things together.
Okay. All right. So is it more, understand it's mixing? Is it more just a title issue?
No, I think there are places in the content
Okay.
where it basically calls plan development plan reporting. I mean, I think I would welcome it if Jacob and the guys who worked on the straw man will go through and actually make it so that it reflects the plan development process.
Okay.
This, however, this section is about plan reporting, so that reporting is, I would want to sort out the reporting part from plan development and have plan development be a separate section which reflects the straw man process.
Understood. All right. All right. Mr. Cathan?
Without belaboring the first part, which is about the lack of approval process,
Okay.
I wanted to go into the more specific comment. It has to do with direction and with Order 91256, where it said the commission also directs the work group to take into consideration FERC 1920 stakeholder process and includes assumptions meeting, etc. And recommends that the process follow that, and the work group did not follow that, and that's my proposal.
Okay. All right. All right. Anybody have any responses to that?
I was just
I
gonna
thought
add,
we did that in the straw man, but I guess
yeah, I was just gonna add, I mean, I could look up the specific language in that order, but I think the order directed us to consider that process, right, as we went into that phase 2A. And so we certainly had, I think, discussions about it and discussed how that kind of built into the straw planning process. And I think we ultimately landed on kind of continuing to move forward with the straw process. So I would say I felt like the working group did consider it and did have discussions around it per the order from the commission, but ultimately came forward with this recommendation. And again, kind of what the most recent order from the commission was kind of accepting that process.
I'm looking at, looks like page 10 of 91-256. It states the commission also directs the DSP work group to take into consideration the recent FERC order 1920 stakeholder process. I mean, I thought we had done that, but I guess perhaps
There are parts of that are not,
Right.
which includes assumptions meetings and etc. So having 30-day review cycles and things like that. So it's not following that structure. So Jacob, where specifically in the latest order are you saying that the commission made a comment about that process? And this was non-consensus, item, my remembrance.
let me pull up that order.
So like I said, I think, as you read that order, it says the commission's or the work groups to take it into consideration, and they were describing that process as they outlined it. And so what I was saying was, I think as a working group, we did discuss it and incorporate it in our discussions in the fall, and ultimately landed on the recommendations that we did. And with the final straw process, obviously that was what was put forward. And the commission accepted that with the addition of, the utilities filing the reports, not just, on their website in terms of the feedback, but to them. But they had accepted that as the process. So I feel like all those things kind of work together. They recommended we consider that FERC process. We incorporated that FERC process into the working group discussions, ultimately landed on, the proposed straw process, which the commission accepted in the most recent order.
Yeah, I mean, the way I read the initial order, it just says we were supposed to consider it when we developed our process. And I thought we did that, but again, I guess we didn't do it enough.
That's my opinion.
Okay, no, that's fine, sir. I appreciate it. That's it. All right. And you also included that you wanted utilities to address all the comments filed on a draft plan and where things were incorporated or not incorporated.
That's correct.
Right. And I thought we had talked about that, but I think that was didn't the commission address that?
what the commission says is final, accepts the final straw man, but it directs it to file a response after step 6 of the commission. Also accept the report's recommendations, the utility's response to stakeholder feedback that published on the utility website, including what proposals we evaluated or not evaluated, and the reasoning for these decisions.
Mhm.
So this is a very, a very, very, a high level summary.
Sure. And I'm sorry, sir, where were you reading from, sir?
I thought I was reading in 91-490.
Sure, yeah, but can you?
On page 6.
Page 6, okay. All right, let's see. Page 6. Other key non-consensus. Okay. Yeah, I thought they had addressing comments, but perhaps they didn't. All right. So we'll have to go back and take a look at those. All right. All right. Just in response to that last bullet, Jacob, do you have any comments for that, or in response?
With regard, go ahead, Ethan.
Go ahead, Ethan.
Well, I'm a little perplexed by this request. We must respond to all comments within 30 days. So we're asking for us to, and I thought the commission covered that by saying what we will be reviewing, what we won't, and why. And the 30 days just seems like that's an extremely short period. I don't know why we would want to put that in regulations until we've tried this. It just seems very stringent, and probably, I mean, if we receive 1,000 comments, are we to hire a, ICF to come in with a bunch of engineers to evaluate them all? This just seems a very restrictive in considering where we are in this process, and I'm not exactly sure what concern it addresses is what I'm struggling with here. I don't know what problem it seeks to solve. If David could speak to what the risk is that we're addressing, I would appreciate it.
It's very simply that, ensuring that the commenters, input are considered, and making sure that the stakeholder process is not just a reporting and then, and then thank you for your comments.
Right.
I fail to see why there's a risk of that. I mean, if you think that we really need to, when someone says that we should be incorporating hot dog-based DERs, if you really think we should, spend a lot of time on that, or, and I've been a part of these kind of processes, you will get people who will submit things about aliens. You will get some things that are off the wall from the public. And I don't know why, what is needed there.
And Jacob, I'm sorry, Ethan, I have been, part of, rulemakings where there's been 1,000 comments. And
I submitted them.
Right. Yes. So, I hear you, but, I do think there's a process that needs to be done. And that's our opinion. And that's what we put forth.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
I think the order is more than sufficient, but.
All right. So we're going to have to agree to disagree on that one. All right. So data collection. Again, don't feel obliged to offer anything. If no one objects, we can move along. All right, hearing.
That one seems like details to be determined. So I guess
Yeah.
I know John was flagging that for us to obviously work on, and
Sure. Yeah.
I'll admit there's a few markers here in these next sections, but I'll admit that our review to this moment has focused on the earlier sections. And so we've got a couple in here, which, I can talk to, but definitely we'll be revisiting this.
Absolutely. Yeah, obviously. Thanks for highlighting that, Andy. When details to be determined, that's obviously we need some ideas and some discussion on those particular items.
And I'll just note, we did have some on the, similar to what Al mentioned, I think kind of difficult for me to parse apart the plan process or the planning process from this reporting section. But if this is referencing the data access and how that should be provided, I mean, we had some discussion and floated some ideas that we can provide follow-up on as mentioned. So I think that's what this is referring to.
All right.
So,
all right. Thanks. Jacob.
Yeah, obviously time-wise, just weren't able to get to this. But in terms of like the details to be determined, obviously the straw proposal had a lot of the details in kind of what each of these pieces were envisioned. So I would imagine, given that the commission kind of accepted that process, that a lot of that would form the foundation of what gets filled in here. So I think we have, a commission-supported starting process for a lot of the details listed here.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? All right. Yes, sir. Samurai. Or yes, ma'am. Gosh, I'm sorry.
No worries. So I just want to say we're going to provide comments as well. We just provided initial comments, but we're going to add to that.
Okay. Very good. All right. Moving on to B, line inputs and assumptions. OPC had some comments on methodologies and assumptions. We need to have the utilities provide a narrative and methodology that is accessibly written for stakeholders. All right.
yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward. It's maybe a request or comment.
Sure.
And I referenced the working group report where it was mentioned more about methodologies, and within the straw proposal on step 2, I'm not sure that it's explicitly called out. I think it's one of those ones where it's often implicit. And so maybe people were already planning on this, but I've found going through this in Oregon, that's where, if I haven't introduced myself formally, but I spent 5 years with Portland General Electric in their distribution system planning process, working for the utility. And so have a lot of lessons learned for that, which was, they really went and tried to do a similar stakeholder engagement process. And there is a benefit to just seeing in writing what is the utilities methodologies. And I acknowledge that may have already been provided, and I'm still getting up to speed here, but that's kind of where that was coming from.
No worries. Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, Andy. And I did look up you up on LinkedIn and saw your background. So you and I have actually some similarities there. Interesting. We really believe heavily in the stakeholder engagement portion of this, and during the technical conference, which Andy, I highly recommend you review. There was some great stuff in there. They spoke about the problems, and I believe it was in California. And if one of the technical conference SMEs wants to correct me, which feel free, but they had that problem in one of the initial grid mod proceedings where the utilities brought highly technical information, and so they had to do a level set. And it's sort of like what we did in the first year of this project, this work group. And we are fully expecting that to happen. And bye, Paul. Darn. That is actually, I think, something, I'm not sure we need to put it in regulation, but it is definitely something we believe has to happen, because we are going to be, that level set will need to happen in order for stakeholders to meaningfully participate. So appreciate your comments there, sir.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ethan.
All right. Thank you, sir. Anybody else want to weigh in on B? I know, obviously, we'll visit this again. All right. Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking at the straw man, and as we've said, it depends. I understand this issue that David's raised as to how much we align with the PERC 3-step process, but in terms of details, I would agree that if we stick with this, that there is detail in the straw man that perhaps at least some of it should be incorporated in regs, because right now it's just very general. And so that, I mean, I think it's because the straw man is not an official document, it can't be incorporated by reference. And so I think some of the content has to be imported here. That's all.
Seems fair to me. All right. On to C, published preliminary electric system plan. And Al's concern is the 3-year interval refers to the actual development of the next cycle of utility DS planning. On B. All right, so.
Yeah, this is another place where it mixes the reporting with the plan development.
Okay.
That's all. I'm just trying. I actually think that this section probably needs to be retitled so that it is plan development, reporting, and stakeholder engagement. So that, and then one section would be on plan development, and the other would be on reporting, which some of which comes later on. But it's here, this plan and reporting thing gets mixed together in a whole bunch of places, which are like at E and F again, further below.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Or anybody else agree with Al's kind of overall take that the kind of thing, how it's written is mixing up the plan versus the report?
I'll say, I think, to be honest, Al, I'm not fully I think I'm partially tracking kind of what you're getting in terms of development versus reporting and all that. But I agree in terms of here, some of those sub bullets under C probably need to be pulled out into a different area. I think as you look at the straw proposal, there's like a general information section which had some of these bullets, and I think in the draft, I think John just tried to incorporate it into the steps, and I don't know how successfully that kind of got incorporated. And so maybe there is just a general applicability section within this process and then separate things for the steps. Because like the 3-year cycle, I think, was one of those pieces that was more just general information about the process than it was, the actual development of it. And so maybe, Al, to your point, that can be separated out into those 3 sections.
All right. Okay, so it sounds like we're at least maybe on the same page on that. Certainly, to the degree we need to split these up, trust that everyone will do that. All right, on to D, preliminary results and receive feedback. Jacob, Ethan, any problem with the insertion of preliminary in there?
I think that's probably fine. Obviously, that's the plan before the DSP conference and any feedback from the commission or stakeholders. So I think that's a fine add.
Okay. All right. All right. So we'll mark that as a good for now. All right, and then define yearly schedules. All right. And in terms of, Jacob, exactly what are your defined yearly schedules?
Yeah, so I think, some of these points that are highlighted over the next couple sections, I think John made the point last meeting of like, we have to figure out when in the year a DSP conference is happening, when are we reporting on these things. And I figured it would be beneficial for the utilities all to get together and talk through like, when do we do our planning processes? How can we best align those things where possible? Also taking into account the November 1st report, is there a chance to, combine them? So I figured it would be good for us just to get together outside of this meeting, have some recommendations to be able to put forward to the group on that.
All right, fair enough. And John did say that, trying to figure out the best time to have the technical conference and review, go over the annual reports. All right, anybody else? All right, annual technical conference. Al. All right, couple concerns. Looks like there might be some discrepancies between ENF and there's no requirement for the plan to include targets related to metrics to track the progress. And then, but G2 references annual updates. Whole thing requires rethinking. All right. Anybody want to weigh in on that? On Al's thoughts? We need to complete overhaul.
I'll say similar to above, I think I kind of see where I was coming from. I think like some of the details here were from, step 4 in the straw, which was, publishing that preliminary thing. But then they're kind of put into the annual technical conference. So it may be good to separate out what goes in the full plan that's published and what goes into an annual update that gets published by the utility, recognizing those are two different things. And so it may be best fit to split them out or kind of better frame that.
Okay.
As it relates to the technical conference.
All right. So splitting up the actual plan and the updates. I'm with you. All right. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just for clarity, this section to me was confusing, but these sections, it does below, I think it's G, talk about mentioning the including metrics. It's sort of it's an afterthought at the end, including reporting on metrics. But in the annual updates, which is this section, it doesn't talk about the metrics. It seems to me that we just have to be consistent. If we have metrics and we're going to use them for management of implementation, then we need to be consistent. So it's in one place, it's not in the other.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. All right. Anybody else?
And I know you're not going to make us do metrics today.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to get there. All right. Yeah. John had suggested focusing on 3 and 4 and the stakeholder engagement process. But again, I don't want to keep folks too late. So hopefully we can get at least through section 4. All right. Utilities provide details on final plans. Like that's kind of, Jacob, I imagine this goes back to your offline meetings with the other utilities.
Yeah, I think we can look at all those
Okay.
points where
Great.
we're looking for a time of the year and try and see if we can come up with something that works best for everyone.
All right. Appreciate it. All right. Then we go down. Let's see. It looks like staff had one change here. They went in 2, changing each year to each annually. I guess that probably just makes grammatically, it probably makes better sense. Let's see, we're in G. Any massive concerns with this? No. All right, we'll go with each year. Let's see, and then all right, let's see, G2E. Question was, let's move down there. Question is, was this a reference made by Al during the January meeting, or January work group meeting, which was filed on November 15th?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This was just, maybe G2E was too specific. It was more for this whole topic of reporting. And there was some, I just wanted to flag that there was some comment. I think Al mentioned it, and there was some back and forth with John about the timeline for stakeholders to react to this annual filing, and maybe that was because it was the first time, but I wasn't even sure if this was that same reference, so that's why I flagged it.
Okay. Timelines to respond. Let's see. Metrics person. Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you off the top of my head, I'm not sure. All right. Anybody else on that one? We're kind of getting into the comments, and I'm sure. And this obviously is referring to the annual reports, I would imagine. All right. All right. Commission order seems pretty straightforward. We could probably do that anyway. Utility consideration of feedback. I know we touched on this a little bit. Mr. Cathan, I'm sure this probably doesn't satisfy you.
Not entirely,
Okay.
but that's to be expected. Based on my previous comments,
You're tough to please.
But I would, in this, my only concern here, it does say they need to file a response. The question is, what is the response? I'm not going to belabor it.
No, it's okay. File response to stakeholder feedback, what stakeholder will be evaluated or not evaluated, and the reasons for those decisions. Obviously, we have to figure out when those responses would be filed, but you're looking for something more. You want more include something more expansive.
Right.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry, Ethan. Go ahead, sir.
I don't think this will give Mr. Cathan any comfort, but this is a regulatory process, and at the end, if a stakeholder feels that they're, they can always file a protest. That's always open to everyone. This just describes a process. It's still open for all the regular regulatory actions. So I'm not sure that there's really a risk here.
All right.
Thank you, Ethan.
All right.
I'm not sure I need to say much more.
I'm sorry. What'd you say, sir?
I don't think I need to say much more. Thank you, Ethan.
All right. All right. Thank you, sir. Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, a small point. I just want to mention that in that section up above, comments filed by parties, it floats. It's neither G nor H, and you said it, and I think you're probably right that it pertains to comments on the annual report.
Right. In this particular section, yeah. That's
it's not in that section. Apparently, it seems to.
Right. Should probably move it up. It should
like
probably be 3.
It's like number 3, yeah, in that section, right? And then agreeing with, I guess, in terms of comments and the conversation between Ethan and David, there is mention of a docket being established. I don't know that we finally established that, but the order does talk about a docket. And so is that where, if one had comment or didn't feel that comments were adequately being paid attention to, is that where you would file it? Has the commission decided that there will be a docket for each utility's plans?
I don't know if it'll be one docket or a separate docket, sir, off the top of my head. Yeah, it's. If you'd obviously want to file it in whatever docket you're referencing in your comments, but I don't know. I hesitate to say that it's going to be one docket when it could be 6 or 5 or 6 different ones. But obviously, if you make the comments specific to either the utility or to a specific docket, then then it'll be, I think it'll reach where it needs to go. All right. All right. Let's see. Anybody else? All right. So next is metrics. I don't, and it's already 3:30, so I don't know that we necessarily want to tackle that. Does anybody have any parting shots? Go ahead, Al.
I just searched it, and in fact, docket is in C1C on page 27. And it says utilities should publish an electric system plan on the utility website and also file this plan with the commission under the electric system plan docket assigned to the utility.
Okay, so it sounds like it'll be an individual case number.
Yeah, I guess that's how it would work. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was established, but that's fine.
All right. All right. So looking ahead, let's see, get rid of that. I think I noted earlier that Thursdays are going to be, there's several Thursdays moving forward that I'm not going to be available. And I think John, for whatever reason, John's going to be down in Annapolis on several Thursdays testifying on bills. So, so we're going to start meeting on Tuesdays. And with that said, if we could get comments, any comments, suggestions on what we've talked about, as well as, you know, some of the metrics that we didn't hit, to the extent you have comments, that would be great. Send them around on the 20th, and we'll talk about them on the 25th. And I would encourage everyone to, yes, sir, Jacob.
I was just going to ask, you know, as we're developing comments and edits, is there any specific sections you want us to like prioritize as a group? And obviously, if we can address more things, great. But like, is there any piece you want to focus on, just so that way we're all putting our energy towards the same piece?
Well, I think we could probably steer clear of, I mean, I think 1503 and 1504, obviously what we covered today, is probably the meaty portion of the regs. That's just my opinion. So to the extent you can focus on those for the next meeting,
Okay.
that would probably be beneficial. The metrics might be just more than we can, it might be more than we can chew for the next one.
Sounds good.
All right. And to the extent you're making a suggestion, you know, if you've got a reference to either the work group report or the order, I think that might be helpful for everyone. So at least we know where you're coming from, and you know, that you're not pulling things out of thin air. Not saying that anybody would, but it might speed along the process if you could reference kind of justification for the addition or deletion. Okay. All right. With that said, oh yes, Samrit.
Just a question. Did you say 04? Focus on 04 and 05?
03 and 04, kind of what we covered today.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. All right. So, all right. Anybody else? All right. All right. I will let y'all go. I appreciate the flexibility of everyone for today, and as well as me moving forward. Yes, Jacob.
Oh, I was just coming up to say thanks.
Appreciate you keeping me company as always. All right. Take care, everyone, and I'll upload the meeting as soon as it's done. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Be safe, everyone.